Okie dokie.
Got it. Thank you. If you could take the role of the governing body first.
Mayor Driver,
Here.
Ms. Giles McCormick. I think I saw her here. Yeah, she's muted, but she's here. Ms. Hand,
Here.
Mr. Johnston. I don't see him. Mr. Long,
Here.
Mr. Runyon,
Here.
Ms. Tilly.
Here.
Okay, then I can take a roll call of the planning board members as well.
Yes, please.
Chairman Dashna,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Engelhardt,
Here.
Mr. Cook, I do not believe is here. Mr. Budney,
Here.
Mr. Campion. I don't see.
Yeah, he told me earlier today he wouldn't make it.
Okay, and I got a note from Mr. Hain that he would not be able to attend, most likely. Ms. Giffen,
Here.
Mr. Hill is not here, I don't believe. Mr. Norton,
Here.
Mr. Levitt,
Here.
Ms. Weitzman.
Here.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. So we're here this evening to see the presentation by Stantec, followed by a housing study by Volk. This work has been underway for several months, well over a year. Was not intended to take this long, but COVID kind of changed everything. When we started this, the original plan was to have a lot of in-person meetings to talk with community members. Stantec and the FCP did a fabulous job of pulling it together and kind of changing it so things could be done online. I'd like to thank all community members and all stakeholders who did participate and talk with the folks from Stantec as this was happening. It's important work. And from there, we will go and go forward. David and Jeff, I am going to make you co-hosts so that you can share your screen.
All right, and Jeff will be the driver of all things screen related.
Great. So Jeff, as soon as you're ready, the floor is yours. And also as you're getting ready, I just want to give a shout out to Robin Lapidus with the FCP, who was really key in pulling all of this together. So thank you.
Thank you. And Jeff, should I jump in quickly?
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Okay, so first of all, it's been just a real privilege and honor, but maybe even more pleasure to work with all of you. And as Mayor Driver noted, it was a period none of us probably would have expected to work under, but we really appreciate how engaged the borough community was. And Mayor, we really appreciate how engaged you have been as an individual. And I'm very serious, that makes a real difference. Tonight, we're going to present, I think many of you have seen this document, but not for a while. We'll present it again. But maybe even more importantly, we're going to hear from Lori Volk. And I'm going to just introduce her very quickly in a way that will embarrass her, but it is not exaggerated. Lori is, in my opinion, and I've worked with lots of housing analysts, the premier analyst of changing and emerging housing markets in this country. What she's going to present, and this is always tough for everybody, remember, including me, is data. It's not recommendations. It's not policy suggestions. It is data as a really powerful tool for the borough to use as it moves forward in implementing the report, the work we have all done together, I should say. And what was, we recommended actually that the borough undertake this study, not so much because we doubted, well, as you all know, a major tenet of the report is that downtown would benefit by leveraging a rapidly emerging, very strong sort of walkable, place-based, amenity-rich seeking housing market, put it that way, that can really support down main streets, and that this demand is unfolding at this very same time that housing within walking distance of retail is becoming the strongest support for retail. And in fact, Main Street retail is probably the one retail area that is done relatively well in recent years compared to malls, for example. The addition of new housing can just bring a lot of vitality to Main Street, which in turn attracts jobs and investment and all the things we want. One thing the mayor has been very good about reminding us at every turn is that when we talk about housing, we have to remember we're talking about diverse housing in terms of income and age and housing preferences and all the ways in which we identify ourselves as different. This needs to speak to Flemington's diversity and aspirations to be diverse. One of the reasons we love working with Lori Volk is that not only does she tell us this is how much demand you get from market rate folks who can pay full freight, but this is the demand you should think about meeting from people at various lower income levels. So she actually also will talk tonight about demand, which is, as Mayor Driver constantly reminds us, just as important from lower income folks as it is from higher income folks to be part of this community, who are part of this community and want to be. Lori also provides very important, and she's the only person I've worked with who does this, information about lifestyle preferences. What kind of house are these people looking for? Cool new lofts, traditional townhouses? What is it? They're not just a number. They're not just a housing unit. What kind of housing unit? And to do this, she sort of and she'll talk to you more about this, but I just want to give you a little hint. She reaches deep down into IRS data and is able to look at how folks with similar incomes and household types and backgrounds have performed in the housing market elsewhere. What kind of housing did they want? How much could they pay, et cetera, to paint what has, in our experience, been a remarkably accurate picture of not only the market in terms of numbers, but of the kinds of housing, who these folks are likely to be, what are their aspirations, what kind of lifestyles do they like, et cetera. All of this, again, is not to say what Flemington should do. It is a powerful tool for implementing what you want to do, for achieving your goals. And if I have left anything out, Robin or Jeff, from that introduction, please tell me, or Mayor Driver. If not, we can jump to the next slide.
I only have one other thing to add, and my apologies. I should have mentioned it before, just a little bit of how the process will be this evening. So Stantec will present, and then we will go to the presentation of the housing study. Then we will do questions and comments from council, questions and comments from planning board, and then we'll go into the public comments. When we get into the public comments, depending upon how the time goes, we may limit to 3 minutes. So I will ask that you ask all of your questions rather than a back and forth, so that the person you are addressing can answer those questions without eating into your 3 minutes of time.
Mayor, could I ask a quick question? I had meant to say that if people have points of clarification they need to ask, that's fine with us. I don't know if that aligns with your procedures, but.
No, it generally doesn't. I'd rather you present and we can go back if anyone has questions. So take notes if you're going to have questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, then on that note, Jeff.
Thank you, David. So we will start with the broader community action plan. Like David mentioned, we've presented this in iterative formation over the past year or two. This is our latest draft. It's still not 100%. It's still technically a draft, so we can still make modifications through the course of our discussion, but we feel it's largely complete. This report also comes with a handful of appendices, so I will not go into those today, but we do have some backup, and that'll all get packaged up soon and shared with you for deeper review after this meeting. I'll reference those as we go. So the
and I'm just going to jump in for the public that this will all be placed on the borough website.
Great, thank you. So just a recap of the overview of the project goals. This project was funded by the Opportunity Zone Challenge Grant from the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. It's was issued to a partnership of the borough, the FCP, the county chamber of commerce, and the county economic development. And it has really been a team effort, I think, as we mentioned before, pulling this together. We were hired, we're planners. We specialize in neighborhoods, in downtowns, and revitalization and changing communities. We've been really excited to be a part of this. The project goals focus on implementation and early wins, building momentum, promoting Flemington to the regional and national development community. That's in keeping with the Opportunity Zone directive and theme, and just generally providing a framework for new development, revitalization, and investment with the community in mind, and economic development impact in mind, first and foremost. So what we look for in gauging the success of our effort is to boil it down, a bustling Main Street environment. That would be success in our minds. A complete 15-minute neighborhood, as you might think about it. A walkable, close-knit community neighborhood where you can really get to everything you need in your daily life within a 15-minute walk or so. And Flemington has the bones to deliver something like that. It already is on track to do so, and we think we can really build on that as a marker for success as this vision is implemented. So we had several stages to our work. We began, of course, looking at previous plans that have been done over the past decade or so, and issuing some initial assessments that we would then test through the course of the rest of the project. The master plan from 2010 was a great place to start. They're completed about every 10 years or so. The borough's due for another one now. And it summarizes the official vision, the official priorities for the borough over the coming decade. And supplemented, a supplement to that was a document, a memo called Envision Flemington, which added a little more nuance on infrastructure ideas and connectivity. But in both cases, the primary themes were fostering growth, managing change, really revitalizing Flemington's core neighborhoods, reinforcing the historic character, green building, arts and culture. Those themes carried through to subsequent planning. In 2014, the Downtown Strategic Plan report by Tara Noble, which really dug into several potential development sites around the borough to understand where new development could land, how new housing, mixed-use development could help bring parts of Flemington back to life. And then the Roger Brooks study a year later complemented that by suggesting how placemaking could reinforce and really leverage the energy that new residents, new people, new visitors would bring to again, bring downtown Flemington to life and quote, make Flemington cool again. One thing to point out about the Tara Noble report is it did set a target of 900 to 1,100 new housing units over several redevelopment sites across the borough. And we felt that was, that made sense, that it's consistent with what we think would make a real difference here, and also is doable given the real estate available. So our initial assessment that we tested throughout this process was, and as it was seen in many places like Flemington all over the country, housing is really the primary catalyst for economic revitalization these days. That bustling Main Street I mentioned, that's really what it's all about. If you have that, you tend to have a strong community, a strong local economy. It's a really strong metric for successful revitalization. So we want to make sure, and in the rest of this report, the study, does this assessment of ours align with the vision and priorities of the Flemington community? Can the market bear this? Can the market provide? Will it drive this much development? And is there room to fit it all in? Is there infrastructure capacity? Can it fit? And allow Flemington to remain what makes Flemington special? As the mayor mentioned, we've done a number of community engagement stages, more virtual than we would have liked, but it's okay. We made it work, and we did have really good participation. We will have an appendix that summarizes this in more detail, but we had a lot of folks visit our web-based engagement portal, lots of interviews with all sorts of stakeholders and leadership, including many of you on this call, multiple public meetings. It was really a great conversation, and we feel like we engaged with a good cross-section of the community. So some of the many comments we heard, people looking for shops, places to eat, improving Main Street, more alluring walkways that lead pedestrians through the neighborhoods, sidewalks, continue the Love Flemington theme, and take some good lessons from other communities around New Jersey and adjacent places. So at the end of the day, our goal with the community engagement was to see if we could find consensus around goals, around vision, and we do feel like we did that. There is consensus in Flemington. So some ways that manifests are through people's pride in their local community. A lot of people really feel good about how Flemington looks, our historic architecture, how it feels, how walkable it is, the local businesses, the arts and culture. There was also some consensus on what it might take to improve Flemington. But what we like to see is generally these opportunities for improvement, we're doing more of what's already working. So that's always a positive thing. Make it more walkable, add more diverse shops and restaurants. It wasn't a change course and change everything. It's a, let's just keep going on the path we're on. That's always good to hear. Priorities ranged from walkability to more retail to open space to the authenticity that Flemington is really known for. And we boil this down into a vision statement. We like to try to encapsulate the way that the community feels about their moment, their opportunity. So in Flemington, we see that as building on its historic character and innovation heritage. Flemington will become renowned in the region for its distinctive walkable neighborhoods, unique local retail, arts and culture, and a diverse, welcoming community. So I hope that vision statement rings true for you too. We've translated that and other comments and sentiments we've heard into a set of community goals, just to try to boil it down to bridge from that visioning process to the strategies and recommendations that you'll see later. So our implementation steps are organized under these same three categories, trying to realize these goals through our recommendations in the study. So now for a little more context, wanted to talk a bit about some national trends that we always want to put things in the context of what's changing and happening nationally, economically, demographically, and then also connect that to what's going on locally to really complete the lens we'd be looking for in a recommendation. So David, if you wanted to take over here, we could start with the national trends.
Apologies, I was muted. I'm going to try and do this fairly quickly because I think I've probably been through this about 10 times with each of you collectively or in effect. So I think it's important to understand how different the next, well, we've already entered this period, but the current period extending for at least the next 20 years will be from the last probably 40 years in terms of how markets are functioning, how we are working, and how we're actually moving around. But I'm going to focus on housing markets and the economy first. So over the next 2 decades, and probably considerably beyond that, the large majority of net new households are going to be singles and couples without children. There are lots of reasons for this, but let's just leave it at that for the moment. This will present, has already created, and this is despite some of the early memes related to COVID, the strongest, I'll call it urban, but think walkable, mixed use, whether it's in a village or New York City, community rich, place-based demand for housing or demand for housing in places with those kinds of characteristics, as opposed to a big backyard, for example. The ability of Flemington to tap this market will be a powerful tool for drawing investment to the community. Housing, more than anything, within 15 minutes, yes, definitely within 5 minutes, supports retail more than probably any other tool, certainly far more than adding jobs. For example, people who live near retail spend 3 to 4 times as much per capita per person than people who work near retail, for example. Certainly much more valuable than adding a new highway interchange today. That mass market highway-oriented retail is what Amazon is competing with. It is the personal experience of a main street that is actually best able to thrive, and it thrives when we can bring housing near it. I'm going to jump ahead. One of the concerns that we heard early on in the process was that folks said, we love the neighborhoods along Main Street. We don't want them to change. Well, Flemington is in a very lucky position, a fortuitous position, I'll call it, because there are a couple of large sites, Liberty Village, which is a victim of the change in retail, cut glass, et cetera, where new housing can be accommodated at scale without touching a blade of grass on the existing neighborhoods, immediately adjacent to Main Street, yet still bring people the kind of vitality that gives them a great place to walk. Most communities up until this last year have wanted more than anything else to add office space because they said, well, this is how we bring jobs to our community, and this is how we bring tax base to our community. Well, what the pandemic did was actually shine. It didn't initiate the trend toward hybrid work. It accelerated it and cast a very harsh light on how strong this trend had become. In fact, in cities across the US, the absorption of downtown office has been in decline for more than 2 decades because this trend has been underway. There's a recent survey that PwC, the accounting firm, and who's paid a lot of attention to this, came out with. It said that 65% of employers wanted their employees in the office at least 3 days a week, and 55% of employees wanted to be in the office at least three days a week. No matter which number you look at, that is a dismal number if you're looking at demand for new office space. But what is happening is that as people work remotely, housing is becoming a way to attract jobs because a lot of folks work from home, or they will start small businesses in the community in which they live as opposed to the one in which they worked because they are spending much more time at home. They are also meeting friends and colleagues for lunch during the week along Main Street, for example. And a Main Street oriented downtown is a terrific place to attract people who combine live and work. So with these trends in mind, why don't you go next, Jeff? Sorry to, I've really sort of said this, but related to this is the fact that we are all becoming much more diverse. I think we know this. I think you've experienced this as a community. Every community has experienced this. This is actually, diversity is actually, I'm going to be very crass, a real plus in the marketplace. You know, if you're my age, you remember an era in which diversity scared people in the housing market. They were afraid of it. Today, if you go out and survey folks in the housing market, particularly younger folks, it is lack of diversity that is a constraint on housing demand. People are seeking, they don't want to live in a bubble. They want to live in a place that feels like real America and that celebrates diversity. Flemington is one of those places. And we want to make sure that the investment that this plan produces, particularly in housing, enriches this tradition of this important Flemington tradition. Next, please. So at the same time, and this is where we get to jobs, clearly no complete community subsists on housing alone or retail alone. You know, it is very important to attract jobs to community. It's important to realize that job growth comes, net new job growth comes entirely from knowledge industries and innovation, from industries that require some higher education. There is a very real shortage of folks with as much education as our economy needs right now. And we have to come back to net, if you want to grow jobs, these are the jobs that are there to grow. So it's very important to attract the kind of talent, the kinds of folks who in turn attract jobs and investment. And these folks more than ever want to live in mixed use, walkable, diverse from many perspectives, community-rich neighborhoods. And again, think of the potential, think of Flemington today and think of the greater potential Main Street could have as the center of just an increasingly wonderful community. Now, it's important to also note, you know, many of the rest of us need jobs too. A knowledge industry job is the most effective way to create other jobs. When you add, we're doing a lot of work in the city of Buffalo now. The city of Buffalo projects that for each new knowledge industry job, they add 3 to 5 additional jobs. Actually, they say 5. I say 3 to 5 to be more careful. And because there's a lot of spin-off from this kind of employment in terms of service industries, actually demand for increased retail. So this is a very important way to attracting these jobs, these folks to live and work, important way to build more support for local businesses. This is actually, it sounds very elitist, but it's a very important strategy for growing jobs across the full spectrum of the community. Many folks, you know, with less education are facing declines in the jobs available to them. And this is an important way to make new jobs available. Next, please. So, downtown revitalization can compound a virtuous cycle, meaning as you draw folks to live, and particularly to live and work in downtown, you can support more businesses. You've probably heard us about 200 times mention a threshold of roughly 1,000 new housing units over the next 10 years in Flemington on these larger sites I talked about, certainly primarily. Because when you hit that threshold, you hit the point at which you create the core, the compact critical mass of demand that then attracts retailers who then make a place more of a destination, which then attracts more folks to come live, but also more folks to come work. And if somebody is opening some new office space, that's the kind of environment in which they're going to open it. And again, please ask, well, I'm sorry, abide by the mayor's request that everyone hold questions, but ask questions later when we come to it if this isn't clear. So housing begets retail, begets vitality and activity, begets jobs, begets more housing, more retail, et cetera. Again, this isn't something that has to happen to a community. This is all about providing you with the tools to grow the kind of community you want. This isn't a limitless virtuous cycle. It's one you put into practice until you reach the point at which you want to reach as a community, and then to keep adjusting the levers as you go forward. Next, please. So I think I've really gone over these conclusions. Housing is economic development. Housing is 2/3 of our real estate economy. So even beyond the fact that the housing market has shifted so dramatically toward folks who would want to live in and around or close to Main Street and downtown Flemington, it is also the largest, the most efficient way to attract investment into a community. And you know, the rest of this, I think I've really emphasized. I was honored to give a keynote address for the Hudson Valley River Pattern for Progress Consortium, which works with all the cities and towns in the Hudson Valley. And we all talked about how Main Street and the downtowns around Main Street are more important to the success, the livability, the economic competitiveness of their communities and their regions than at any time, really, since World War II. So on this note, Jeff, it's probably back to you.
Okay, thank you. So now to think locally with that context David just shared in mind, and test our assessment about the 1,000 or so new housing units over the next 10 years. Does it align with the community's vision and priorities? Can the market bear it, and will it fit? We do think in a nutshell that yes, it does support the community's vision for all the reasons David just suggested. Housing is the mechanism by which you deliver those amenities, the type of walkable environment, the type of rich community, the lively main streets that we did hear folks across the community say was of high importance to them. Is that development achievable in today's market? Prior to Lori's report, we did some initial review of the data. So this will be superseded by what she says, but we did notice a few things, a few indicators that made us think this was really feasible. For one thing, the population growth has leveled off, but we know that's primarily because the housing stock is full. We do think that there's a tight housing stock. Vacancy rates are going down, rents are going up. These are suggestions that the market is ripe for new development, that folks are clamoring to come here, to move into Flemington and the surrounding area. There have not been very many multifamily housing units in particular developed over the past 10 years or so. There are some in the pipeline, although maybe not enough to reach that 1,000 unit threshold, especially not within the borough itself. There have been some and are some developments in the periphery of the borough that were perfectly financially feasible and have filled up. We would say that if they're not necessarily proximate to the types of amenities that David said everyone's looking for. So if they can make it work out there, we think it's definitely possible and promising within the borough of Flemington, where there is that walkable environment, those amenities, that culture. We'll hear a little bit more about this in a few minutes, but the more robust housing market potential assessment by Zimmerman Volk Associates, we think reinforces this 1,000 housing unit goal and suggests that it's perfectly doable, reasonable. It's her findings will find that that's I think our assessment was in line with what the market suggesting it could do. I'll let her pick that up when she does her presentation. So an important question is there room for all this? 1,000 units sounds like a lot. The Terra Nobles report from 2014 did suggest there was. They modeled some developments on a handful of available sites. Many of the sites remain available today. The borough has advertised them. This pamphlet over here on the upper right was promoting them to developers in the region. Many of them are shovel ready and that they're already entitled. So we do think if you add up the acreage of all these sites and consider what density one might expect to see in today's market, there does seem to be more than enough space. You could get 1,200 to 600 new units on the currently available parcels. So that suggests you could get the 1,000 and still have room left over for.
I think Jeff froze.
Other amenities.
Okay.
I'm sorry, can you?
Yeah. Yes.
I'm going to turn off my video. Sometimes that helps. I'm going to assume you heard everything I said on that slide. We can come back to it in the questions if you'd like to. Other important considerations for accommodating development in Flemington, the relationship to the historic context. Flemington has a lot of historic architecture. That's one of the things that makes it special, one of the things it's known for. We did note that many of the larger potential redevelopment sites are actually on the periphery. They're not embedded right in the middle of architecturally sensitive, historically sensitive neighborhoods. They're on the edge of neighborhoods like Cut Glass, like Liberty Village. These are areas that are where it would not be that complicated, that difficult to build something of a higher density, but then also allow it to transition architecturally to blend in, to connect, to resonate with the neighborhoods around it. And like I said before, public places, green spaces, public art, these would be inevitably a part of these developments. And also there's enough land to provide more of those things in addition to the housing development. The local infrastructure we know is an important question. We spoke with folks, engineer and others. So some of the good news is the sewer and stormwater systems have ample capacity. School enrollment has actually been declining for the past decade. So while we would not expect a lot of new students in some of these housing typologies with fewer bedrooms, and it might be more geared towards couples and singles without kids, even to the extent there are children, the schools have the space to accommodate them without straining that system. And from a traffic standpoint, we think that there's more than enough capacity to accommodate the increased traffic you might see from this development. In fact, the traffic from a property such as Liberty Village in its heyday generated far more traffic than the housing we're talking about would. So and the
Jeff,
infrastructure has not changed much.
I'm sorry, I'm going to be rude and jump in for a second. I'm going to go back to school children. Actually, it was just an article today I was reading about the national decline in school kids, which is not surprising given the shift in households. But beyond that, as you all well know, because you're stewards of your community's well-being, for a long time, new housing was regarded as a fiscal drain on communities, and that largely had to do with the expense of educating kids, which was very important, but difficult for financially. That was one of the reasons why communities wanted to attract jobs. Today, when so much of the growth in households is singles and couples without kids, they bring a net fiscal benefit, both directly but indirectly, because they eat in restaurants more than folks with kids, and in other ways spend more money along Main Street, generate second-degree tax income. But we have been working with communities that actually today find that because particularly suburban office rents are depressed and probably will grow increasingly so, while housing rents are strong, that the same square footage of new housing, primarily aimed toward the market we're talking about, provides a better fiscal benefit to the community than the same square footage of office. This is the exact reverse of how we've looked at it for many decades, but it reflects the different demographics of today and changed nature of the market, of both markets. Sorry, Jeff.
Okay. All right. One of the major concerns with new development in the borough would be the water supply. And that's a known issue. A lot of people talk about that. However, and so to get as development proceeds towards that 1,000 unit target, it's likely that water supply would need to be expanded at some point along the way. It might not be the next project, maybe it's project number 3 that is the tipping point. And so one of the challenges there is the process involved in expanding the water supply and finding and permitting and designing and constructing a new well might take longer than it would take to build a typical multifamily development. So the borough needs to be proactive about that and get that capacity in place ahead of the new development demanding it, but there is that is something that the borough is already considering. So happy to hear that, and there would be incremental increases in some of the other services that the borough provides, the police department, for example, and other things, but nothing very significant along those lines. So in general, the borough is in a good position to accommodate this new development. And so we would say it checks our boxes. The community, it resonates with the community's vision. It's achievable. It can be accommodated. It can be handled by the infrastructure. And really what it all comes down to is something more like the picture you see here. This is really what we're trying to deliver here. And so we think that housing, all the housing above and around these people having their lunch, that's what delivers this type of environment. And that's, we think, what would help realize what this community does envision for itself in its future. So our last section here, the implementation of recommendations. We'll give an overview. We're not going to walk through every last recommendation, but it is, they are listed in the back here and will be provided after this presentation. Like I said before, really focusing on implementation, feasibility, doability. Nobody needs pie in the sky thinking. We need ideas that can really be built, really be achieved, and build some early momentum, some early wins. The FCP has been working on this, has some budget to do some updated wayfinding and demonstration projects. We'll talk a bit more about that in the public realm to build on this momentum. And then also, we hope this report lays a useful foundation for the next master plan. We spoke with many folks on the planning board, and to the extent that we've established a community consensus and some vision and some strong ideas, that just gives some momentum to the master plan process, and you can focus on the next bit. You've got this foundation to build on, and you can focus on implementing these and coming up with real strategies to make these things happen. So critical strategies in our recommendations. The first one, housing development, as we've talked about several times, is the driver of this revitalization. It's the primary tool here and in other communities. There's a number of large sites that we're all aware of, for example, but not limited to Liberty Gas, Liberty Village, Cut Glass, Agway, and then other areas for infill, multifamily and townhouse developments that could supplement the larger projects too. It's not just the big developments. And we've got the housing study to back this up, which we'll hear about soon. Another really important strategy in Flemington is, like we've said, it's a small walkable place, but sometimes it feels like Stangl Road and Main Street are miles apart. We identified what we're calling this cohesive corridor, which effectively runs along the rail corridor, but is not limited to that, as a way to tie together the Stangl corridor with Main Street along Fulper Road, importantly, linking a number of those potential development sites along the way. This would establish a continuous pedestrian pathway from Route 12, potentially past Main Street to Broad Street and beyond. It could link up redevelopment sites and provide opportunities for temporary and long-term public spaces. And Flemington is known for its festivals and events, and more of these could happen along this pathway. And this would be connected to placemaking enhancements along Main Street, so that energy follows the rail and also bends up Main Street to link the rest of the Main Street corridor up to the courthouse. So some details on this, and we have a memo that summarizes a bit more of our initial thinking on this. We did do a little study just to test out the idea. These are some moments you could achieve. For example, one important connection between Central and Stangl, and some potential green space where programming can happen, a bridge across the culvert, a simple pedestrian bridge, just to make that an easier connection for pedestrians. At the Fulper and Main Street intersection, a potential pop-up public space. We thought it would be really exciting to install murals, such as here on the ground, to signal that you're entering an important place and an exciting place. And similarly, Mine and Church Street, and just signaling to folks that this is you're where you got to the destination you were looking for, and also that this is a cohesive environment, that there's some consistency from end to end and place to place throughout this portion of the borough. So our implementation matrix, as we call it, is our summary of recommendations organized in the three categories I mentioned before that are also how we think about the community's goals. So we like to at least in our minds, map these recommendations to those goals, these as ways to achieve them. Many of these are ongoing. These are happening. The FCP and others, the borough, have already made progress on some of these things, and we think several are achievable in the next year or so. So we really focused on near-term implementable recommendations that can build momentum and establish frameworks for longer-term revitalization over the next decade. So I will stop there. And this is what the recommendations section looks like. So we would invite you to review this once you receive the full package and let us know what you think.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. That was quite informative. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I know we spoke many times through that process, as did pretty much everybody on this screen, whether their photos up or their names. So we do appreciate that. Next up, before we get to questions, is we'll go to Lori Volk. She is with the company. Lori, why don't you just introduce yourself?
Okay. My name's Lori Volk, and I'm co-managing director of Zimmerman Volk Associates. And we've been doing housing research for over 33 years. And I personally have done more than 100 downtown studies, and we work a lot with Stantec. And I'm very much delighted to be here tonight. And I'm sure you'll be very pleased to hear what the findings of our study are, because they bode very well for the future of housing in downtown and actually in all of Flemington. Is it switched over to me now? Can I get to my presentation? I think I'm going to turn off my screen as well, because I'm making this presentation from my home and our internet runs through our phone line and the upload is terrible, and I want this to work. So off
Well,
I
there
go.
might be plenty of housing. You can move down the road once. we
Yes, that's
We've got
right.
internet here in town.
That's right. Okay. All right. So here we are, downtown Flemington and the borough of Flemington. We were delighted to be able to undertake this study. And as I mentioned, I have personally done more than 100 downtown studies. And over the 33 years, we've done at least more than 600, probably more than 700 studies now. We're very active. We do a lot of work all over the country. So we have a lot of experience understanding markets and housing markets and target markets for housing, which brings me to how we approach our analysis. We use something we call target market methodology, and that's based on market potential, not demand. We always hear people talking about, oh, is there demand for housing? We don't know whether there's demand for housing. And we decided a long time ago when we did our first study in a city that had been losing population, that demand was really a very difficult number to come up with because projections were not of any kind of household growth. And there'd been no new development in that city for quite some time. So how are you going to determine what should be built and how much it should cost? So we decided to go in a different direction, and that's looking at market potential. And that's based on the fact that in any given area, households move. They're moving from one unit to another. And if you can understand who they are, what they're looking for, what kind of housing they're looking for, what their financial capabilities are, you can determine a housing market position that will capture that market, and you will be very successful in achieving your housing goals. The first thing we do when we undertake a study is really look at who's living there now. And as you can see, first we looked at what the residents were, and we looked at both the borough and the county. The county has a huge impact on the borough, and the borough is going to be having more and more impact on the county. Hunterdon County is actually the fourth most affluent county in the United States. And that puts a lot of pressure on a lot of citizens who live there. As David mentioned, the diversity of the borough is much greater than the diversity of the county. And we see here that the borough reflects lots of trends that have been going on nationally. Over 63% of the households contain just one or two persons, and there are only less than 19% of all households are married couples with children. Now, the median household income in the borough is $66,000, and that is still just under what the national median is at $67,100 and way below the county median. And there are a lot of reasons for that, which I'm sure you probably all understand, having to do with the type of housing that gets built, the age of the housing, and that all has an impact on values. So we looked at what the percentage of households with incomes under 25,000, which is generally considered below the poverty level, and that's about 21.6%. But in the borough, more than a third of all households have incomes over 100,000. I'm going to go through these next slides a little faster than normal because I have 20 minutes to deliver all this information to you. It's a lot of data. You will be having access to this PowerPoint presentation, so you will be able to download it and study it all you want later on. But the key findings here are that since 2000, only 6% of all the units in the borough are new, and 31% are single family houses, which is very different from the county at 75% and the nation at 65%. Median housing value is almost $313,000, which is way above the national median of $250,000, but still below the county median of over $440,000. The ethnicity and education of Flemington residents, 71% are white, but you have a large Hispanic Latino population of 37%. 29% of all of the households actually of all of the persons over 25 are graduates of high school, but more than 36% have a bachelor's degree. These are all data points that we look at because they're very important in understanding who the market is for people who are living in the borough itself. We're not just talking about building housing for people to move to Flemington, although that's going to be very key in terms of long-term growth, but also to provide new housing for residents who would love to live in a new unit, and there are none being built. And so if they really want to live in a new dwelling unit, they have to move out of the borough that they love. You can see that in terms of workers, more than half of all borough residents are white collar, almost 27% are blue collar, and 22% work in service and farm. There was a question about this drive alone to work, 70%. That's actually very comparable to the national number. Americans tend to drive by themselves when they go to work. And particularly if there isn't transit, that number is always going to be very high. Only 13% of the households who live in the borough have no car. And that is usually something that we see when there are a lot of downtown housing units, because people who live downtown soon discover that that car that used to be a necessity of life has become an expensive luxury. So who are the households in Flemington according to their life stage? Now, it's really important to understand life stage, because that, depending upon where you are in your life stage, can have a huge impact on what kind of housing you'll be looking for. A family is, generally speaking, looking for a much different kind of housing than, say, a young hipster just out of college. So in the borough today, currently, 42% of all the households are what we call empty nesters and retirees, essentially members of the baby boom generation. Another 49% are what we call traditional and non-traditional families. That's because families now are extremely diverse, more than just mom, dad, 2 kids and a dog. And that this generation is primarily made up of what we call Generation X, and also leading edge millennials, that generation that is now the largest in America today, whom we thought would never get married, would never have kids. All us baby boomers who wanted to have grandchildren were being frustrated, but finally they're having kids, so life can go on. Younger singles and couples, just 9%, and that's a low percentage, and partly due to the fact that there isn't the kind of housing that a lot of young people would like to live in. And once you start building that housing, that percentage is going to go up. So these are all the questions that we answer in our study. And we don't just make the numbers up. We use a lot of very powerful data sources. We use the Internal Revenue Service to help us understand household mobility. And as you know, if you move in a given year, you have to report it on your tax return. And the IRS compiles all that data on a national level by county so that we can understand over the most recent 5 years, how many households actually moved into and out of Hunterdon County. Then to understand the Flemington mobility, we use the American Community Survey, which the Census Bureau conducts every 1, 3, and 5 years. And we project that out over the next 5 years to understand how many households in Flemington are likely to move and how many would be moving out. So we get a very clear understanding of household mobility, and that's very important. We layer that then with another national database called Claritas. And this organization has a methodology to look at households across the United States, grouping them into 68 different market groups based on like characteristics. And we have been using this data now for 25, 30 years and have found it to be incredibly helpful in understanding housing markets. We get from them thousands of data points on each of these household groups. And using this methodology over the past 30 some years, we have found it to be a much more powerful way of understanding housing markets and what you need to build to attract them. And our track record has been very strong. We've been in business for 33 years, and largely because this methodology has proven to be so powerful. So one of the questions is, in terms of the housing market, is are we just looking at market rate, or are we looking at all incomes? Our policy and our process is to understand what the market is for households of all incomes, not just market rate, but also people who are barely able to scrape by, because it's very important to understand what your housing market is over time. And you need to understand where that data is going to come from. And what we do is looking at market rate versus affordable, and using HUD data. And the Housing and Urban Development Department of the federal government every year assigns dollar values to the median family income for a family of 4. And from that number, they then calculate all of the different affordability categories. And it's something then that we can use across the country. And when we say it in one place, it means the same thing as in the next place. The numbers change because the values in each area changes, but everybody understands what we mean then when we're talking about area median family income. So in the Middlesex, Somerset, Hunterdon MSA, that median family income for a family of 4 is $123,200. So from that, the breakdown per household, 1 person, 2 person, 3 person, it goes all the way up to 8, at 60%, 80%, and 100% AMI are shown here on this table. What we looked at here is 60 to 80% AMI covers households in what we would call the affordable or workforce category. And 80% to 100% is upper affordable workforce, and 100% AMI would be market rate. And you can see that it is actually a very high entry, almost 52,000 at 60% AMI for a single person household. We've just finished a study in another city where that 60% number was 23,000. So you can see the affluence of New Jersey and Hunterdon County is quite apparent on these numbers. So below 30% AMI is typically housing that's public housing or older existing units. 30 to 60% AMI, if it's new, it's generally a low-income housing tax credit property or a deep subsidy ownership. And what we're looking at in this study is 60% AMI and up. So the first question is, where does the potential market live now? And we use that IRS data, American Community Survey data. Just under a quarter of all the households that are moving and represent the market for Flemington already live here. 30% would be moving from the rest of Hunterdon County. 16% would be moving from the region, Morris, Somerset, Warren, and 30% from the balance of the US. You get a heavy influx from northern New Jersey and also from New York City. So how many households are likely to move to Flemington each year over the next 5 years? Now we calculate it for each year, but then average it out, because otherwise the numbers really become overwhelming. And again, I would like to emphasize that what we're looking at are households of all incomes. So each year, on average, over the next 5 years, 1,270 households have the potential to move within or to Flemington over the next 5 years. Who are they? Well, the family market is actually a fairly sizable one. 53% of all of the annual potential market are family households. Another 25% are empty nesters and retirees. The baby boom generation was the generation that actually spurred downtown redevelopment in so many cities across the country. And finally, younger singles and couples at 22% of all the potential market. Now if these households actually find the housing they're looking for, that's going to mean a significant increase in young people in borough of Flemington. So when you look at all of those different households and you aggregate their housing preferences, what kind of housing should be built to attract those households? So rental apartments, 42% of those households would prefer to live in a rental apartment. 7% would prefer to purchase a condominium. 17% would prefer to purchase a townhouse, and 34% would prefer to purchase a single family detached house. So one of the things it's important to understand are what are the alternatives that people have. And in the Flemington area, rents range from about $1,000 to $4,500 a month. This is market rate for 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, and a rent per square foot that varies widely from $1.14 to $5.48. We also took a look at downtown Somerville because they're further along on the downtown market than Flemington is and have a lot of the same attributes. They do have transit, which Flemington lacks right now. But I think that Flemington has the opportunity to actually get here, even without the light rail that Somerville has. And you can see that the rents here are actually fairly comparable to what already exists in Flemington. We also looked at what resale prices were for condominiums, about 140,000 to about 200,000 for 1,000 square foot units. And the price per square foot ranges from about $175 to $196. And in terms of townhouse resales, we're looking at a variety of different townhouses that have been on the market and were on the market at the time we did our study, about $185,000 to over $500,000 sale prices, and unit sizes 2 to 3 bedroom, 2.5 bath townhouses. We also looked at single family detached, even though in a core downtown, we generally do not recommend building single family detached houses. We know that those single family neighborhoods that surround and are adjacent to a downtown are very important as well, and often have an occasional lot that's empty and no one really knows what to do. So we looked at what the current resale prices are in the borough, and they range from about $250,000 to over $500,000 for 2 to 5 bedroom houses. So the next most important thing to understand is how much are these households willing to pay if they're going to actually contemplate moving to an apartment in Flemington, which means for developers, this will give them a very good idea of how they should be pricing the whatever units they do build. Now, every year, on average, over the next 5 years, there will be approximately 360 annual renter households with incomes at or above that 60% AMI. And you can see how when we look at their income and calculate what their incomes can afford at 30%, paying no more than 30% of their annual income for rent and utilities, this is what the current annual potential market over the next 5 years can afford to pay for new units in Flemington. We did the same analysis for the annual potential condo buyers. Only in this case, we calculated what a mortgage would be based on about a 4% interest rate and a 10% down payment and monthly payments that would not exceed 30% of the household's annual income. And you can see here, again, we were looking at households with incomes on a broad range. So the price points go from $200,000 to more than $500,000. And you can see that there are clusters from 2 to 300,000, and then from 450 and up. In terms of townhouses, there's an annual average market of about 116 annual buyer households each year over the next over the next 5 years. And these again are households with incomes at or above 60% AMI. So this includes affordable workforce households as well as households who can afford market rate. And we have price points ranging between 200,000 to more than 500,000. And you can see that in this case, it is much more evenly distributed through the different price points. So that's actually good, because that means that you have a lot of choice in terms of, for a builder or developer, which price point that their product would match most likely. And then finally, the detached buyer households, 326 of them on average each year over the next 5 years, with incomes at or above 60,000 AMI. And this market turned out to be skewed towards the higher end. And that, I think, has a lot to do with the fact that all of the single family detached housing in the county is also higher end. And so the market is actually looking for larger houses in a higher price point, generally speaking, mostly over 400,000. But we do feel it is important to include workforce affordable pricing in it, and there it is at the lower end. So based on what all of these different households can afford, what should the rents and prices be in general in downtown Flemington? And again, this has been priced for incomes at or above 60% to AMI to market rate. And first we were looking at downtown Flemington apartments, and these can be apartments over the store or new buildings that are under construction in various locations, with monthly rents ranging from about $1,300 to more than $3,100 for units containing 500 to 1,500 square feet. That's a studio to a 3-bedroom. And that works out to $1.77 to $2.82 per square foot, which should work in terms of construction, which is something that developers are always concerned about. In terms of condominiums, we have base prices ranging from $200,000 to $600,000 for 1 to 3 bedroom condominiums. And that works out to about $259 to $382 a square foot. So we've covered the range for both the affordable workforce to the market rate. Townhouses, again, in downtown, incomes at or above 60% AMI. We have base prices ranging from $250,000 to $525,000 for 2 and 3 bedroom, 2.5 bath townhouses, which works out to $222 to $280 a square foot. And finally, infill single family houses. I know that there are not a lot of lots available in the borough. The housing stock has been really well maintained for the most part. Base prices from $300,000 to $625,000, units containing between 1,350 and 2,300 square feet. Now, this does not mean that you cannot have a house built or a unit built for more than these prices. This is the heart, that middle heart of the market, where you can have the most success in capturing those potential households that represent your annual market. So the last question is, how fast will people buy those units or rent those units? And we determine absorption by using annual market capture. So we know how many on average units that we forecast would represent the market in each of these different housing types over the next 5 years. And we have used these capture rates that have been very helpful in all the different downtowns and cities we've worked in. For rental housing, we believe that developers can capture between 20 to 25% absorption of the new rental units. Sales of condos would be capturing 15 to 20% of the annual potential market. Sales of townhouses would capture 10 to 15% of the annual potential market. And detached houses would capture 5 to 10%. What does that actually mean in terms of numbers? In terms of numbers, that means that in downtown Flemington, rental apartments, 72 to 90 units per year over the next 5 years. Condominiums sold, forecast 9 to 12 units over the next 5 years per year. And townhouses, 11 to 18 townhouses per year over the next 5 years. That comes to 92 to 120 units per year over the next 5 years. And when you add in infill single family, if you had the lots to do that, you could capture an additional 17 to 32 sales of single family detached houses per year over the next 5 years. So what does that new housing achieve? It will definitely enhance downtown in terms of retail. It will actually start to attract small offices because a lot of people get tired of working in their home. And we have developers who are doing multifamily apartments. And because retail is such a challenge to put on the ground floor, they're putting in co-working spaces. And that generates just as much activity on the ground level as a lot of other retail uses. It will revitalize your neighborhoods, and it will encourage a diversity of uses as well as a diversity of housing types. And it will also provide new housing for a diversity of income. And where will Flemington be after 5 years? This is 5 years, not 10. 545 to 760 new housing units in the downtown and the neighborhoods, yielding a more vibrant downtown, new apartments for all ages, and some new family ownership housing, which is something that every city needs. Any questions? I'm at your service.
Okay, so what we'll do, Lori, if you could stop sharing your screen. Excellent, so we can see everyone. I am going to pop over to, I think we may have lost Caitlin. Do we have you? I see you also in attendees, so I'm not really sure what to do there. So we will start with questions from council members. And you can then direct to whoever, thank you, Caitlin, to the Stantec guys, to David or Jeff, and then if you want to ask Miss Volk, Lori Volk questions, just direct them to her, and then we'll go to the planning board member questions. Anyone from council with questions? You can just speak up.
I've had this presentation a few different times. I was
Right,
very excited to see some of the details from the housing study portion. I think that it's difficult sometimes, the understanding Flemington and the larger trends and how those meet and mesh. And I think all of that, everything with Stantec and the housing study really kind of came together and brought both of those things, the trends and the uniqueness that is Flemington, pretty well together. I didn't have any specific questions, and I just wanted to say thank you for the time very much. I know it's been a long haul, and really appreciate the amount of commitment. Thank you.
I had
So
a
I have
quick
a
little,
question. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Jimmy, go on.
just a quick little question. It was about the water being, I forget what Jeff had said. It was like a third tier issue or something like that, like a tertiary consideration. Like right now, we have capacity, but down the line is, how exactly did you word that? I just wanted to be clear on that.
We spoke with I guess the previous engineer now. I believe that there's been turnover in that position. And his judgment was that the water supply at the time we spoke with him was adequate for the time being, but that if we're talking significant new housing development, at some point it would need to be added to.
Okay.
We
thank you.
don't have the exact numbers behind that. That was his best judgment.
Okay. Thanks. Appreciate it.
So my question, and David, it might be for you both. You guys touched upon it, and Lori, you touched upon it. The workplace in the post-COVID era. You mentioned, like, some employers want 3 days a week. Some employees maybe 3 days a week. And certainly the commuting and from Flemington, in a place where there's not any adequate mass transit, and I use that word very strongly, adequate. How will the whole need for housing and roads and daily road use kind of continue to trend in the post-COVID era? Post-COVID, as we move on over the next 5 years, 10 years, what do you see happening to that workplace in relation to residential? I guess that's probably badly worded, but I think
that's a really, really important question right now. And so first of all, I'd love to say I don't know, but I'm going to actually go beyond that. We are actually, by coincidence, studying about a third of the city of Buffalo, New York right now, looking at the feasibility and desirability of taking down an expressway and replacing it with a boulevard and other tools. This is something going on around the country. And one of the things that has been really interesting is to see that pre-COVID, downtown work commutes were declining. Downtown worker population was not declining. More and more of those folks were moving to downtown or living near downtown. But for the last probably 20 years, the number of folks who got on that expressway in the suburbs and took it to downtown has actually been declining. And of course, it fell off the cliff during COVID. In working with our good transportation planning colleagues, they have been telling us to expect a decline in commutes to office centers, and B, a leveling out of the demand so that much less peak demand morning and evening and spread out more over the day. And spread out over the day is not at all as noticeable as peak AM and PM. So the congestion that folks worry about is generally the AM and PM commute related congestion. So what they are telling us is basically that congestion concerns, if this is where you are leading, should be, are certainly worthy as concerns, but the impact should be dropping steadily as more and more folks work from home and work on much more hybrid schedules. Is this getting your question?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. So thank you.
Thank you.
On that. And I look forward to seeing your work in Buffalo, having grown up there and seeing what they do with that Skyway.
Oh, it is it's a great city. So
okay. Yeah, try driving over it right before they close it in the snowstorm and you'll have very different feelings.
No, I got almost, never mind. Okay. Yes.
Never mind. That's not what we're here for.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions from council?
Yeah, I have a question. At one point early on, you spoke to the education in the room in schools. I think you had said that the national trend is downward and that there was adequate room in our schools. Was that right?
Well, I will, Jeff and I will both answer this question. The national trend has definitely been stagnant school populations and projected declines. So Lori has noted that millennials are finally having kids. They are however, having fewer kids than the populations that preceded them, for whom many of our schools were sized. I'll put it that way. So generally, the trend has been toward reduced, certainly, pressure on school facilities, and actually more adults paying taxes to support schools per student than was the case before. Is this beginning to get at your question? And then Jeff, you might actually speak to the what we learned literally or specifically about the borough.
Right. Similar to the water question, it wasn't in our scope to completely quantify and fully analyze an issue like that, but we did through conversations with folks who do understand the local data real time, that the schools have more than enough capacity. They're not full, I guess. And so one thing, like David said, we've seen is communities like to have a balance in their school age population. You certainly don't want to have too many kids, but you also don't want to have too few. Buildings start to be redundant or inefficient. And so it felt to us like Flemington was similar to many of the other places we're working, where there is space, there is a potential decline in school age population. And so that shouldn't be a concern when considering the new housing that we're talking about here.
Well, I mean, maybe you guys should have done the data, because I'm reading an article that was just dated December 8th that says the district is considering options for redistricting our students amid findings that many of the buildings are reaching capacity. And I mean, the data is right here in this article. So I'm just curious how, with all this additional housing, we're talking Liberty Village, Agway, Guitar Boy site possibly, Courthouse Square, Cut Glass. What is this going to do to our schools? I mean, I would think that that would be a really important data question to analyze.
Okay, if I can interject here, the declining school population has been something that we have been observing in cities and in downtowns for the last 10 years, 10, 15 years, actually. And it has been particularly prominent in denser cities where there's a lot of multifamily housing, because that means most of the occupants of those units are 1 or 2 person households without kids. In Hunterdon County, if you look back at what the data was comparing the borough and the county has a lot more family households, a lot more family housing. The more single family housing you build, the more families you are likely to get. The kind of housing that we have actually outlined in our study is predominantly multifamily, rental, and for sale. And that tends to have very few children. So that any new apartments are likely not to place any pressure on schools in the borough until single family may or may not have children involved in those new houses. Certainly, David is correct. Even though the millennials are finally having kids, it's a large generation, and they all haven't really gotten there yet to really start having lots of kids.
We can probably work with Lori to be a rough assessment, but we can demonstrate the assumptions on which it's based for over the next certainly 5 to 7 years, suggest how many kids housing might produce. I think it will be a small number. I think what we will also demonstrate is that the real estate and other tax fiscal benefits of this will outweigh the costs in terms of kids. Now, this we are learning from you. We had one of the impression from previous conversations that there was excess capacity in the local schools, and you are telling us something different. But we could bring this information to the folks at the school district and talk to them and see if we need to address this as an issue. Generally,
I'm just reading a quote from the article. I think that this is from the superintendent of schools. I
Sure.
think that even if these developments weren't being built, we would still have some difficulty. I mean, we know Courthouse Square is going to be adding, according to a study that we did previously, that there's going to be added students. Right here in the article regarding the Agway site from the superintendent, it was said that I do not expect a lot of students because it's 1 or 2 bedroom apartments, will deter families. Okay. But there's going to be kids added. And then we also have to factor in what's happening surrounding Flemington as far as our schools, because Flemington isn't the only area that feeds into these schools, and how that's going to affect the property, the taxes overall. When you have, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I'll tell you what, why don't we'll work with Lori to give you, the mayor and council, a projection of the, it will be a range of the number of kids.
Sure.
I think we will also be able to demonstrate that the fiscal benefit will certainly go considerably beyond supporting the costs these students will bring to the community. But I certainly understand from your point and from the superintendent's comments that you were reading to us that this is an issue that we should address before we finish this process.
Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in because this was a concern of mine as well. I don't know if this is like normal to do, but I did reach out to the county Board of Ed office and asked them for data, which I got the data for the enrollments across the county. So it's broken down by, I don't know if you guys did that, but I'm looking at, when I looked at the 2015, 2016 Flemington Raritan School District numbers, it was 3,150. And I'll gladly share these charts with everybody. That was 2015, 2016 school year FRSD, which of course pulls from a lot of areas, not just the borough. But the 2020, 2021, that's the most recent information on their page. There was 2,968, which is a negative 182 over the course of that time. And then Hunterdon Central, which again takes borough kids, 2015, 2016 was 3,047. 2020, 2021 was 2,650 with a negative 397. So I'm just looking at the numbers. I'm not a statistician, but I can certainly send this along. But I think if we can dig into the numbers with the county, like, can they get specific enough? I didn't go that granular. I just said, give me the charts for all of Hunterdon. Because, like I said, I'm not a statistician, but I did see, I just see with my own eyes that the numbers are down. So I don't know how much does Flemington Borough impact FRSD, Hunterdon Central, which are our main feeders.
Can I say, why don't we take responsibility for giving you some data, because this is all and back it up so that it'll be credible for you, that might look at the number of kids who will be generated. We can talk to the folks at the school district and understand how this aligns with their projected enrollments. This will be the first community where this, of all the communities we've worked with the last couple of years, where this will actually be an issue related to downtown housing. If it is, it is, and I want to certainly admit that, but I would definitely love to have this conversation with them and with numbers. And again, I want to emphasize that one reason that many communities are excited about demographic shifts that produce more residents without kids is that there is a real fiscal benefit to the school district. They are collecting revenue without the more revenue with relatively fewer costs attached, if you see what I'm saying. But I'll tell you, but to close the loop, we'll take responsibility for getting this information to you.
Sure,
Because it's an important question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll jump in also, David and Jeff. So this article is based upon an enrollment projection study that the Flemington Raritan School District just conducted and published, I think, in the last week or two.
Okay.
I sent you a link to it.
Okay.
And when you go and look at it, there's a chart in there that shows that some of the schools are getting overcrowded, some of them are under
Mhm.
capacity, significantly under capacity. And the article was mostly about the need to rebalance
Ah,
and to maybe change some of the, the lines for,
Yes.
what kids go
Yes.
to this school and what kids go to
Mhm.
this school. And when you look at those numbers,
mhm.
you'll see that there's capacity, but
Okay.
because of where some of the development's going on, particularly at the north end, and as we saw on your maps that the township is building, or it's also going to like a daymare school. And so that's becoming overcrowded because that's where the stuff's getting built. But meanwhile, you've got JP Case and Riffus, which even with the projections will be at 50% capacity.
Okay, well, I think it's all the more reason for us to help the school district understand the impact that they would deal with. Where will these kids be? And they can feed this information to their thinking. I want to say that Caitlin appears to be trying to buy us this discussion at the moment, but
Specifically with my children who are enrolled in in elementary school,
yeah.
it's something we've been particularly akin to and abreast to in terms of paying attention to where those potential lines may be redrawn, understanding the capacity issues. It's been very exciting, at least at the elementary school level locally, that some of those numbers are going up because at my daughter's elementary school, they just added a new teacher for the first grade for the new time for the new first time in several years. That's been very exciting for them. They have capacity to do more. One of the things that I really appreciated from Lori Volk was specifically around some of the studies that we've done in the past, specifically around schools, that I think people may have a bad taste in their mouth from previous years and previous folks that have come into town, is that it was very clearly undercounting the potential number of students. What Lori Volk, what she shared, 53% are going to be families. Like that number tells us something. That's more than that's a much more realistic number than previous studies have shown and talked about when we've talked about growth, when we've talked about that percentage of single families, boomers, singles and couples and things like that. So that distribution is very encouraging to me and tells us where this growth is, and again, the diversity and the fact that it gives us something to work with. So I didn't feel like you were underprepared in terms of that you didn't do your job in terms of the school numbers. Again, that study is incredibly new, and the information that we were given and that you brought to us was more than we've had ever before.
Okay,
So,
thank you. And we will help. I think hopefully then the information we can provide will help the school district understand where, to use Lori's term, potential further growth will or will not be occurring in terms of new kids. Lori, did you want to comment? You look like you're, no, okay.
No, but I mean, there's a variety of, I mean, townhouses are a wonderful alternative for young people if they can't afford to buy into the single family detached market. And there's, there are some older ones in the borough, but I'm very much in favor of townhouses for young people because they don't have all that yard maintenance, that they're not really interested in all that. And they're not necessarily going to have kids right away. I think it's important. We talk about all these singles and couples, but 100 and count. I grew up here. I'm living 5 miles from you guys, and Hunterdon County and Flemington. It's always been a very family-oriented community, and I don't think we want to lose sight of that. It's just becoming a bigger family and a more diverse family. And I think that's good. It portends well for the future of both the borough, which I think has a real opportunity to establish itself as the real center of the county in the next 5-10 years.
Any more simple questions? Oops, sorry.
There any other questions from council members or follow-ups or anything else?
Yeah, I have more questions. So well, one of your charts had, I think, the vacancy rate in Flemington at 8% and the county rate at 6%. What do you have any ideas like why the vacancy rate in Flemington would be higher than the county rate?
You have more multifamily rental. Renters, renter units will be vacated for a couple of months between tenants while the landlord fixes things up, hopefully. But generally speaking, there are usually more vacant rental units than there are ownership units in any given area. So I found the vacancy rate in Flemington to be extraordinarily low. Most cities are around 15% vacancy because there's a lot of churn, meaning people moving in and moving out. And I think that's that you're so low really indicates that you need a lot of new housing.
So what you're suggesting is that that percentage is a factor of short-term vacancy rather than long-term vacancy.
Yeah, it's short term.
Got it. The other, I'm doing all this from memory because we weren't asking questions during the presentation. There was a pie chart, I think, asking the community like what it thought its needs were, and one of the largest pieces of the pie that I saw, if I recall correctly, was retail. And I understand the idea of developing a town for future residents, but what about the current residents? Because as a council person for 3 years prior to being on council, what I heard a lot of from people who lived here was there's not a lot to do. It wasn't a question of where's the housing, it was where's there's things to do.
Yes.
And Flemington is the densest municipality in the county. And yet we don't seem to be prospering like many other municipalities that are less dense, for example, Lambertville or Clinton. So we're right at what, 4,200 people, and you're suggesting another 1,000. So is 5,000 going to bring the vibrancy that these other towns have?
I think it would be our judgment that it would be 1,000 units. So that's probably 1,200 to 1,500 people actually would be a tipping point. Just looking at the market that you have. What we heard again and again and again is we wish we had more places to walk to. And what people meant was to grab coffee, maybe even beer, a muffin, to sit and talk to folks, the sort of community building dimension of a retail, of enlivened walkable street. And the 1,000 units is from talking to just an awfully long list of retail consultants, is a order of magnitude tipping point that really invigorates the market. And we would think, particularly given the affluence of the surrounding county, that should be able, that to the critical mass of new retailers that brings in should be able to establish Flemington as a much more dynamic destination. One of the things that we noticed, you have been a well-studied place, and I don't know if I would disagree with any of the recommendations for enlivening, bringing life to Main Street and attracting folks, without a discounted mall as a destination, but none of them had a sort of a market driver to support this new vitality. And in this day and age, that market driver is new neighbors. I hope that answers your question.
Sure, but as Flemington systematically converts what was once zoned retail commercial, for example, Agway, Guitar Boy, Flemington Cut Glass, Liberty Village, from retail commercial zoning, we're losing it. Let's say we get all these people, where is the retail going to come from that current people want and that you're suggesting will prosper in the future?
I think on the ground floors of new housing and along Main Street. It's the critical mass along a walkable Main Street that will really thrive going forward. Liberty Mall retail Agway, large, anything you have to drive to is not growing these days. It is walkable retail that A is where growth is occurring, and B, the kind of retail investment that enhances certainly the folks who we talk to, the sense of quality and character and community that they seek in where they live. It's really interesting. You can take 1,000 units and spread it out over a couple miles and not get a single new store or a single square foot of walkable sidewalk. By condensing it on these sites, you can bring a lot to life.
Yeah, retail is not going to be what we always have expected to be in a downtown. It's really now experiential, restaurants, cafes,
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Stores, unless they're really specialized on destinations and have a strong online presence, are very hard to maintain with Amazon. I mean, I see that Amazon truck all over Hunterdon County. So that's where people are ordering from, and that's where people are buying their goods from. So new retailers that actually will come, and they will come to Flemington, to Main Street, once there are more people around, because that's what attracts a retailer, is people on the street. And if the streets are empty, it's going to be a hard sell to somebody why they should open a small, gift shop, a card shop, whatever. And I know you mentioned Lambertville, and you're way too young to know what Lambertville used to be like. But my mother never used to let me go to Lambertville. And look at it today. So, times change. It's across the river from New Hope, and that helped it a lot. And Clinton, basically, they're trying to expand their retail past one block. It's very nice, one block, but it's hard to get it going on the second block. Flemington has a much longer main street to walk from one end to the other. So you need even more density than Clinton does. And just about every building in Clinton has apartments on the upper floors, which is, something they've had forever.
But you've got some very cool stuff in Flemington, like stained glass. And I'm sorry, I don't want to over answer here, but I just remembered that late in 2019, the largest retail brokerage firm in the U.S., it's the director there of that division, basically told me that in 2019, 50% of all retail leases had been for a restaurant, cafe, bar, winery, something that served something to eat or drink, and that brought people together. And that was a new high, but as the new high in a long-term trend that I think, if anything, is accentuated. This wasn't by dollar volume or square footage necessarily. I don't even know that, but by sheer number of leases. And that market, more than any market, is influenced by and supported by folks who can walk to these places today and hope to see their neighbors when they get there. I hope we're not over answering some of these questions.
No, not at all. I appreciate it. I guess the question still is unanswered though. And I'm not just talking retail, I'm talking experiences, commercial.
Yeah.
If we systematically convert Flemington has a very limited amount of developable space.
Yes.
Over 1 square mile. And so if we're systematically converting, as we are, all of our potential developables, our potential space that is developable into housing,
okay,
where are we going to create these opportunities for entertainment for people?
On the ground floor? And thank you. That I really appreciate you said it, because maybe we have not been clear enough. Housing doesn't belong generally on the ground floor, on the street floor where people are walking around. That's where the retail, the entertainment goes. And actually the strongest office market I know of today is the second floor, with a couple floors of housing above. often rented by folks who live in the housing above. Often something that is been developed so it can be switched from housing to office depending on what the demand is in any particular year with that kind of flexibility. But I certainly appreciate your question and concern. It's very important to emphasize that we don't, it is far better to have a use that enlivens the public realm, the sidewalk animates it on the ground floor with housing above to support that activity, that enlivening retail.
So are you suggesting that the redevelopment plan for Liberty Village should be mixed use and have retail, commercial, and experiential on the first floor, or
No, I think it's more important to have most of that where, to the extent possible, to focus that retail, that walkability along to Main Street. It will need certainly some mixed use just to have the amenity that it will take to support it as a desirable place to live. But I would hope that you are a well-managed community, that you will manage growth, particularly retail and anything that involves jobs as much as possible to Main Street.
I have more questions, but I want the public to be able to ask questions. I don't want to go too late with this. So I appreciate your answers and your time. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for your good questions.
We can come back to you depending upon at the wrap up at the end. Any other questions from council members? Seeing a lot of head shaking, no. I'll move on for questions from the planning board members.
Yeah, a bunch of us have questions, I'm sure.
Okay, so Jeff, we'll make you go last because you're chair. Susan, why don't you go first? And you can raise your hand if you're on there, because I'm trying to manage a whole too long list of stuff here.
Okay, so is that
Yeah,
good? I
Susan,
raised
go
my
ahead.
hand. Okay, good. All right. I've been taking some notes, so I'll just kind of go through them with my questions. First of all, I want to thank Jeff, David, Lori, and also Beth McManus, because I was lucky enough to sit on the Opportunity Zone Grant Committee with these guys, and I know how talented they are. And I know Beth's not here tonight, but her coordination with them, I think, was also really, really helpful. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to work with you guys. You've done a great job on this, and it's been over a year now. So I do appreciate it. So thank you. That was not a question, but just a comment. One of the things that I was lucky enough to do was not only did I get to sit on the committee while you were developing this presentation, but I also got to sit on the committee to actually accuse you guys when you went through your interview process. And one of the reasons why I recall the committee chose you guys was because of David's big smile there and his mustache, but also because of Jeff and his knowledge of funding, and specifically what the council or what municipalities in general, not necessarily councils, that he's worked with in the past has to do after the next step after this presentation. So I just want the council members to be kind of aware of Jeff's abilities here. And I would encourage you guys to really work with Stantec in the future, specifically Jeff. He's got a lot of knowledge on financing, finding the right developer for the right location in the municipality. There's a lot of knowledge that this particular project it wasn't in their scope to tap into, but I really encourage the council going forward to utilize that expertise that's here. So I want to encourage the council members to do that. I also want to, and it kind of goes hand in hand, I want to encourage the council members to use Stantec going in the future specifically for the upcoming, Liberty Village as they're developing the redevelopment agreement for advice. I think that they can give you a lot of advice and give you the tools to kind of push back and remain strong to your vision, whatever that is, because it's not quite clear right now. It's more of an open plan. But I think that obviously, because it's an area of redevelopment, it's kind of out of the planning board hands, and the council has a lot of sway and influence on that matter. And I really encourage you guys to use these guys as a kind of a sounding board. Specific to your plan now, a very small detail. I loved the idea of the connection over the culvert. We talked about that and we know that was needed. The kind of the highlights along Main Street with some sort of graphics as you described at the two intersections of Church and Line and Main also were good. I was a little disappointed that that same kind of connectivity that you created at Church to connect Church and Stangl with that pedestrian bridge wasn't necessarily repeated at the end of Fulper. And, again, vehicular, pedestrian, I think that's an opportunity that fourth place where that east-west movement is really critical. So I would love it if you could just take a look at that one sheet and see if you could reconsider that connection with Fulper and Stangl, similar to the way you did it with Church and Stangl. So that's a small detail, but an important one, I think. I want to thank Chris because, and I was kind of chomping at the bit when we came to the school construction. It was one of the first things that I noticed. And if you don't know, just for full disclosure, I have 25 years of experience being a K through 12 architect, mainly in the state of New Jersey. So I'm intimately familiar with almost all of the 619 school districts and have presented the ASSA reports in front of many of them over those 25 years. I feel kind of guilty because David wasn't aware of that article that came out literally last week that Chris referenced. I'm the one who actually gave them in March the ASSA reports from last October 15th. If those of you that don't know, the state of New Jersey requires every school district to report on October 15th of every year. So the reports that I gave them were based on October 15th, 2020. The new reports are available and referenced in that article that Chris mentioned. So I definitely would like you to take a look at those October 15th, 2021 reports. Now, I have the ASSA spreadsheet, and it's great to get the county-wide version like Jeremy did, but we really need to look at the specific sending districts that combines Raritan and Flemington, which covers which pulls in a few extra districts for the high school, but I don't think that factor is as huge. The ASSA report that I gave you in March has a difference of, hold on a minute, excuse me, from 2,687 population in the 2021 year and it projects all the way out to 2029, 2030, because that's what we have to do for our long range facility plans. It's a 10-year, it's 2,084. So that's a more than 600 child difference. And that's why it does make sense that the numbers are going down. And I do think that's the trend. However, this latest report from the school district that literally came out last week was a little confusing and a little misleading, like Caitlin mentioned, and the mayor mentioned, the 4 sending elementary schools that shift of population, specifically from Daymar, because Daymar gets all of the ESLs, which is a large population, of course, of our borough. And I think what the district, that article was, most of the article was saying was that that program is going to be kind of shifted and moved, maybe more equally amongst the 4. But there was talk about how the 4 multifamily units that are being built or are built in Raritan right now are affecting those numbers. And that's something that wouldn't have been reflected in the ASSA report that I provided to you in March. So that being said, the numbers were relatively small. You know, I think my former statistics professor, who happens to be on this this particular meeting tonight, hi Jeff, would agree that, you know, we kind of are nerds when it comes to statistics, and we get into the kind of the weeds a little too much. But that being said, it's and this is where my question comes in. What I want to understand is, do those Raritan Township, those 4 projects that are affecting and skewing the numbers that just came out 2 weeks ago, do they, it sounds like from some of the statistics that you gave us, that there actually is more tendency for there to be families with a typical family. I can't find the percentage right now in Raritan than Flemington. And that's where I was a little confused, because David, you mentioned singles and couples with no children is kind of trending up nationwide. However, Lori had this 53% statistics in her presentation. So there was a little kind of conflict in some of your statistics. And I think that's what needs to be cleaned up. So it's not so much a question, but I'm seeing some conflicts in your statements, what you said, David, and what Lori said, but I know that they're coming from the same place. I think we just need to make the mesh. And I have a feeling that Professor Dashner will probably clarify my rambling a little better than I am when it's his turn. But I do think we need some clarification, some addressing of the most recent numbers. And I'd be curious to know if the more suburban located multifamily units that Raritan seems to be building at a very quick pace, because they're trying to catch up with their COA requirements, where we don't have that same pressure that they do. If the populations of those multifamilies perhaps may have more families in them than our multifamilies will eventually have, I suspect, and this kind of goes to my next question, and I don't necessarily know if there's any data on it right now because it's so new, but I think with COVID, very much couples without any children are probably going to tend to want those 2 bedrooms, having an office and a bedroom, and not have any children. The ones with children may want more 3 bedrooms, is my guess, but I don't necessarily know if you guys really have that kind of statistics available yet, because we're still in the middle of the pandemic. So, and there hasn't been enough kind of built to even get that kind of statistic. I suspect that might be the case, and that might be why the numbers of families are skewing higher in multifamily housing in Raritan versus Flemington. But I'm curious to know if you could perhaps interpolate and perhaps address that, even if it's just a paragraph in your report, in your final version of your report. So I'm kind of throwing a lot of things to think about, but all of that relates to this question of student influence on the district. I know that the council, both municipalities for Raritan and Flemington Borough, get a lot of pressure from people that are concerned about the influence of the number of students that are added to the school district when you build a new housing complex. And I think that we need to really clearly understand how the housing that is proposed in the borough is different than the housing that's proposed in Raritan, and how it's the same, how it influences the school district and how it doesn't influence the school district.
Mhm.
So that's a lot to throw at you, but definitely, I guess my recommendation in short is we need to clean that up and clarify it. And your data literally is only 1 week old, so and it's different. So, but I don't know how different. Yeah, so take a look at all the new ASSAs from October 15th of this year and see how it's kind of trending. You'll only have 1 more year of information, but I hope that helps. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that before I go on to my next question?
Well, so first of all, Lori and I will align our numbers. They do come from the same sources. In fact, a lot of my numbers come from taking notes from things Lori has said. But my reference was to, if you just look at census data, that over the next 20 years, the large majority of net new households will be singles and couples. It may be that the numbers skew toward more households with kids, certainly for the county, and even for single family housing built in Flemington. But I would suspect that both of us would say that the majority of demand for the housing that's really going to make sense and achievable for the borough is going to be for singles and couples, and maybe for very small households. And Lori, please comment.
Yeah, well, and also David was definitely talking national trends.
Mhm.
And one thing we've learned is that every area is different and in some ways may be reflecting national trends, and in some ways may be very different. Hunterdon County is primarily a family-oriented county, and it's surrounded by counties that are like that. So a lot of the market potential are families. I mean, families do choose to live now in and near downtowns. And I don't think that's a problem. I think that's actually good to have kids growing up in and around your downtown and in-town neighborhoods. So we didn't exclude any families from the market potential for that reason. But if a developer, because of that market potential, we included 3-bedroom units in our mix. But a developer does not have to follow that. A developer could build all studios and 1-bedrooms, and you're not going to get a single family out of that. It'll be all singles and couples. So a lot of what the developers propose to do will create the market you get.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think the article that Chris mentioned, I think one of the things that kind of screamed out at me when I read it a couple days ago was that specifically they mentioned the Agway site, that the 2 bedrooms aren't necessarily going to be attracting the same number of families as perhaps they would have a couple years ago pre-COVID, because people are wanting that 2nd bedroom as an office. So I think that's what we need to really take into consideration when we're kind of approving different types of housing in town.
We actually, I'm sorry, I'd be very rude. We do actually, we're sort of trying to collect information from every source we can, and do talk to multifamily developers, and are often on panels with them, et cetera. And one of the things I have noted is, no matter what kind of housing unit you're talking about, adding a study or using one of the bedrooms as a study, or converting the garage to a study is a trend that didn't start with COVID, but COVID accelerated it and made it more visible.
Makes sense. Yeah,
so when
that
we're
makes
looking
sense.
at the kind of housing we're talking about, yes, there's much more of a chance that people will be seeking a study room, a workspace.
Okay. My next question relates to kind of housing types. One of the things I think that we had talked about in the committee was the trend of local residents who are renters in the borough, the trend of them becoming homeowners. It happens over and over and over again. In fact, there's also somebody here on this in this meeting that I know that was my neighbor across the street, and now they own a home, and we were so happy to see that happen. And I've seen multiple of my neighbors who are renters become homeowners in the borough. So that's something that we as the planning board definitely have talked about and addressed in the master plan, and kind of as an anticipation. I guess my question to you is, I saw one of, and I'm sorry, I don't know which one of you had this in your presentation, but one of your slides talked about how the sweet spot for rent for the municipality are rentals and some single family detached. They seem to be the two that had the biggest percentage on your tables. What I'm curious about is, because we don't have a lot of acreage, what is the trend for semi-detached? Something very similar to the carriage gate project that you have noted in your presentation, which I think may be more appropriate than traditional single family detached in as far as new housing developments within the borough, specifically in Liberty Village, which probably is the only one that has the most, and Cut Glass, which has kind of the most potential for that. Because our borough is a limited amount of acreage, is semi-detached more attractive than single family attached for those home buyers that were renters, that are becoming home buyers in the town? Is that something that we should consider when we're
it actually
kind of
is
encouraging that?
Yes, we call it generally townhouses,
Okay.
but the actual category is single family attached, which means it can be a townhouse, a row house, a duplex, a triplex. And certainly they are perfectly viable, wonderful, the missing middle, actually, that everybody talks about, that's missing in so many towns and cities across the country. Certainly, it's a great way to add ownership housing mixed in. But you can also do, there is a segment of the population that loves single family, and this includes retirees. And we found that these small bungalow courts, where it's a small unit clustered with other small units around a little green, is actually very high density. It has the same density as a row of townhouses, because there's no land really associated with the house. They all in front of green, but those are very, very popular with a lot of older couples who don't want a large single family detached house, but don't want to give up the detached house. So
I guess that I would encourage, as the Liberty Village development agreement plan gets developed, it may be a good idea to kind of provide both on those sites, provide that opportunity for rentals and provide that opportunity of the product that you're describing, because then people are essentially moving from one to the other eventually, perhaps in the same neighborhood. I think Cut Glass originally was a very kind of similar concept with the semi-detached or townhomes that you described. I want to move on because I don't want to take up more time than I already am. One of the things that nobody mentioned before, but I think is huge, that again, I encourage the council to keep in mind especially when they're developing the Liberty Village plan or agreement, is I want to say, I'm not sure which one of you had this in your presentation, but the no vehicle ownership percentage that you had in your plan, the 13.2% versus the 2.8% in the county, so 13.2% of the people in Flemington don't own a vehicle versus 2.8 countywide. That's huge. And that just screams to me that we as the planning board need to, as we have for the last decade, encourage public transit opportunities in the borough and make sure that's at every opportunity that we have on any site that we develop in town, that we take that into consideration. That I thought that number was really influential, and I thank you for including that. And the last question I have is for Lori. One of your slides had a big number that, again, kind of relates to the school discussion we had before. You said that it was more than 10% less. There was the slide switched before I could write it down. It was 18.1% versus 29.7%. I think that was the numbers. And it was more than 10. We have more than 10% less in the county of households with children than countywide does. Did I understand that?
Yes, and that's typical of boroughs, cities, towns tend to have more 1 and 2 person households and fewer families.
Which would also influence the numbers of our sending that we send to the district.
That's right. That's right.
So we need to make sure that we keep that into consideration when we start getting pushback and criticism from others when it comes to how much we are sending, how many kids we're sending to the district versus Raritan Township. Essentially, Raritan sends more to the district than we do. And that, I thought that percentage number was really, was really interesting. I never realized that. So thank you for that. Really educational. And I really thank you for all the work you've done this year.
Can I say a quick postscript? And this gets back to the car ownership issue that you mentioned. It costs, according to AAA, it depends again where you are, $10,000 to $14,000 or $15,000 per vehicle per year for each car a household owns. Depends whether it's new or used, et cetera. And this does not include the cost of parking and many other costs that go into owning a car. It is almost impossible to spend half that much using essentially public transit or shared mobility. Meaning, if Flemington can attract, can provide more services, more opportunities to live in a walkable environment where you can meet more of your needs without a car, a household that can go from 2 cars to 1 car is in effect receiving a subsidy of $10,000 to $15,000 a year because you've created a walkable environment. And when the mayor and others constantly remind us that affordability is an issue that you face like every community, another way to provide housing opportunities for folks lower income is to reduce their dependence on the very significant real expense of owning and operating 2 cars as opposed to 1, for example.
Great, thank you.
Susan, if I could just respond to a couple of things you said at the beginning, just real quick. The snapshot of that bridge over the culvert as part of the cohesive corridor, that was just 1 page of many in a addendum to the report that also looks at other portions of that corridor, including the Fulper Main interface. So hopefully
great. I didn't realize that what we were looking at didn't include everything. I didn't realize that. Thank you.
I should have made that clear. So I apologize for that. And also, I'm actually not the real estate expert that you were referring to. I think Brent Sherman on our team. We have a real estate services.
Brett? I thought you were. Sorry. Well, then thanks to Brett too.
Sure. I mean, we're obviously integrally connected within our company, but he leads the real estate services group that we folded into this process along with some
council,
other specialists.
use Brett then, please.
Here I was thinking Jeff was finally getting the credit. Sorry.
I'm sorry. It's been a while since I was on the committee, so I mixed you guys up.
I felt like I needed to be humble on that one. I'm sorry.
Brian.
All right. Thanks. There's certainly a lot of good information there, a lot of good statistics that we're going to be digesting and debating and analyzing for the weeks, months, and years to come. One question I had is in terms of your projections on housing units. It was all on, the impression I got, it was all on new construction, primarily for either rental or owner occupied townhouses or condos or high density. Now, I'd like to know what your feelings are about where potential units could come from existing housing. And what I mean is, one thing we're going to be looking at is we've been putting off our master plan reevaluation, and one particular interest of mine is addressing one of the latest planning concepts is the use of accessory dwelling units within, say, single family residential areas. And that's something I'd like to see us when we do our master plan reeval. But I'd like to get your input on what percentage, do you see that as a viable option to pursue, and what type of makeup in the projected housing units could accessory dwelling units comprise?
Well, ADUs are generally a decision made on the part of the homeowner. So
Well, zoning
it's
has to
not-
allow it too.
Yeah, well, all right. Given
So
that
there's
you
policy
have
implications
passed a
with
law
this.
saying ADUs are permissible, then there's what kind of ADU? Is it an apartment over a garage? Is it a separate dwelling unit in the backyard? There's a variety of ADUs that have been used around the country. I have to say that it is, if the homeowner decides to rent that unit out to a separate household, that's great. That adds to the housing stock. However, what we found is so many homeowners get tempted to put their teenage son out there so they can play his music and not disturb the rest of the household. I mean, it is, we have seen in a lot of communities where the garage apartment or the accessory dwelling unit has been very common, typically in new traditional neighborhoods that are developed around the country. And unfortunately, only a small percentage of those are actually fulfilling a function of, say, providing housing for the aged P, which is a great way to have your parents nearby, is in an ADU in your backyard. But I think it's, Princeton's got that ordinance now, and I don't know, I haven't seen how they're doing and what's happening in terms of what's going on, but typically the municipality is going to have to provide some kind of guidance on how to do it, what they can do, how to do it, how it can get financed, because a lot of homeowners just don't know how to do that. And to say, oh, you can do it is one thing, but you're not going to get a rush of people doing it unless they have some concept of what it is they need to do, how much it's going to cost them, and what is the benefit to them.
I'll just add.
Be honest.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Lori.
No, go, I'm done.
Okay, Santa Cruz, California has done one of the best ADU initiatives, I'll call it, that I know of. And there are other communities too. There are a lot of communities. In fact, a great many communities are looking at ADU ordinances and zoning changes right now. Santa Cruz did a really excellent example of combining that with design guidelines and the kind of information for households that Lori talked about to really make the ordinance effective. And we could help you find communities you might want to consult with. And actually, I suspect that your Jeff on the planning board would also be a good source. He's being modest. But the one
he's like
thing,
that.
Okay, the one thing I would note is in every community where I've seen an ADU ordinance be successful, it starts with a really robust community conversation. And generally the result is positive. And a lot of this has to do increasingly with the fact, and I'm going to throw out another number and hope Lori thinks the same number, that according to the Census Bureau, more than half US population growth over the next 20 years is going to be folks over 65. There are a lot of folks who A, don't need the houses they have, B, would like to stay in them, and C, when you move from a growing income to a fixed income, you face a whole new set of issues in staying in a house, like rising property taxes over time and maintenance, et cetera. And an ADU is In fact, this to me has been the most convincing piece of the conversations I've been part of with communities, is a way, a very substantive way for helping folks stay in their house, in their community. Now, they do need help. They often need help from the municipality to figure out, how do you design it? Who's a good contractor and that kind of thing. But this is in many ways the argument that is most persuasive for folks. The other is to go out and take pictures of communities with ADUs, or think of Google Street View. You can add an awful lot of ADUs and the neighborhood looks exactly the same. You don't see them. It's still a single family neighborhood in character. And the folks who move into ADUs, people come to understand, are largely regarded less as tenants and more as neighbors, because they are mixed into the housing community. But all of this takes this robust community conversation for people to understand. Is this fair? Did we over answer again?
No, that's perfect. So I was looking for some, I appreciate the guidance on how to look on what to follow in terms of, approaching that when we do our master plan reeval. So that's, it's good tips. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. That's the only question I had. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Next up would be Jeff.
All right, I only have one question, but it's in 72 parts. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. So first off, let me add my thanks to everyone for a lot of work on this. I did take some notes just as we're going through here. Just a couple of things. First off, speaking as a member of the most overlooked middle child generation, everyone's talking about boomers. And everyone's talking about millennials, and no one's talking about Gen X, and we're okay with that. You can ignore us, that's fine. Just understand we're the ones who are actually supporting a chunk of the economy right now, in terms of we're the ones who are working from home and figuring that out, and we're the ones whose kids are in grade school, high school, and starting to go off to college and beyond. So just I felt like I was ignored yet again as a part of the most overlooked generation in American history. So just a little side note there. Okay, so
you're showing off your youth here, but that's okay. Sorry.
I'm just saying Gen X folks are in their 50s. We're not all young. Not all of us are, but some are.
Not yet.
I'm sorry.
All right.
Next
Gen
year.
X is moving into baby boomer territory of empty nester and retiree now.
My
So,
nest is empty and I'm happy about
Yeah.
it. So, couple questions that I had here. One for Lori, I really do appreciate the detailed analysis of that sweet spot of where target rent should be and mortgage payments should be, that price per square foot. That is absolutely critically helpful. One of the question I had for you, and again, if you can't answer this on the spot, maybe you can get back with some more analysis. One of the huge challenges of building actual affordable income contingent housing is the construction costs to actually make it work for a developer, which is why you need, public money through CDBG or LIHTC or other creative mechanisms, banks coming in with CRA and all the rest of it bundled together to make it work. And obviously we're not talking about below 50% AMI folks. I appreciate that you're talking about from 60% up to market, because that is that middle that we are missing in town. Given the relatively higher costs in the Northeast, this isn't a Flemington, this isn't even a New Jersey problem, it's a Northeast problem to build, right? And to make sure the development community gets what it needs on return for investment. How comfortable are you to say that a condo development proposed in Flemington that's selling in that 200,000 to 300,000 range, or a townhome in that range, or a 500 to 1,500 square foot apartment whose net rent ends up, being in, the ranges that you were talking about, my question is, can it pencil out? Like, do you feel comfortable that developers will be able to build projects, make their appropriate margins, not getting uber wealthy here, but make their margins and normal profits, given the fact that the the costs in Hunterdon County. You know what it is to do stuff here. Like, that's my first question.
Our studies are important because they're from the consumer perspective and not the developer perspective.
Okay.
And usually what happens, there's a woman that we work with, Stantec and I, who will do then a pro forma analysis to show how those rents and prices line up with what land costs, construction costs, labor costs are in a given area. And oftentimes, there's usually a gap. I don't think there's much of a gap in the upper market rate, but I think there's probably going to be a gap in that 60 to 80% AMI. You can approach that in a number of ways. You can ask the developer to include a certain percentage of the 60 to 80% AMI units in the overall development. And some of the more expensive market rate units will thereby subsidize those less expensive units that are affordable to households at 60 to 80% AMI. We have not seen that mixed income is in any way viewed in today's market as a negative. Again, it's part of the diversity of cities, of towns, and people want to be living in places where it's not all people who look just like them. So that's one way that doesn't cost the municipality any money. Obviously, in a lot of cities and towns, there are various programs and policies that are either greater density than would be ordinarily allowed in order to build more affordable housing. There's housing trust funds that nonprofits can start up, land trusts. There's all kinds of programs and policies that if you're really serious about it, there's a lot you can do to help the developer defray the cost of those units, because it's really important today to make sure we're not just building all market rate housing, because what we're seeing is what's happening across the country is it's becoming like a sideways barbell. There's a lot of rich people and a lot of poor people and not very many people in the middle. And that's really what 60 to 80, 90% AMI is now.
Yeah, that missing middle
gets
is
smaller and
critical.
smaller.
Yeah, that
Mhm.
missing middle is definitely critical in Flemington for sure.
Right.
We've got a lot of school teachers and police
Yes.
officers and electricians and folks who make a decent living, but compared to Hunterdon County's fourth wealthiest in the country kind of level, and you saw that in the data, and I think we
Right.
also so I think that's so I'm glad to hear that that there's some options here. You know, one of the things that was touched on before about I think Susan might have hinted at it. One of the reasons why Flemington Borough is not chasing to meet its COA requirement is that because we've been, for the 26 years I've lived in town, always on top of making sure that we have adequate affordable housing in first, second, third round of COA. After we were one of the first places to settle with fair share housing. Like we are, we always been on top of it. So we're not playing a catch-up game, which is what I think part of the shock we're seeing in Raritan Township is.
Right.
Raritan and Reddington have to come up with thousands of housing units just to catch up. And so that's never going to be the problem that we have to worry about in the borough, because we've actually good planning. We've actually been smart about it. And our ordinance requires 15% for large projects, 50% if it's rental, 20% if they're ownership units for that are affordable. And so, we could talk about, and we can get Beth involved in this because she's certainly expert more than all of us on the state's affordable housing stuff. But I'm glad to hear that what you're saying, Lori. So that helps. So that was one question. Second question was. I was also happy to hear that you were talking a lot about, the rental piece in addition to the ownership piece, and ownership transitioning to rent, rental transitioning to ownership, which is what my family did for sure in the borough. Because, as it stands right now, Flemington Borough is 2/3 rental, and it's only a third ownership units. That's just who we are. We have been for a very, very long time. prioritizing and making sure that that mix stays relevant, I think here. I'm glad to hear that your analyses, both on national trends and then the local market, continues to suggest that that's where I know we're not going to use the word demand, but demand is for those kinds of units
Right.
are there. So that actually is that's helpful to hear that. I wanted to ask Jeff or David, in light of the fact that 13% of folks in town don't have a car or access to a vehicle relative to the county, one of the things that we're going to address as the planning board begins its master plan work in the next year is not only creating appropriate modifications for zoning to encourage the housing development. I agree, we definitely need it. Is to think about those amenities that are important for the residents who are going to be occupying this housing, right? And I think that if you could speak in a little bit more detail based on what the local knowledge you've gotten of Flemington over working here over the last year, like what do we have, what don't we have? Like what is it? Like I know that if you don't have access to a vehicle, walking to ShopRite from town is a risky proposition from a safety perspective. Walking to Aldi is fine. You can do that. You can cross. There's a crosswalk by the Wawa on 31. You can do it. I've done it from my house. But it's not great, right? So one of the things, and obviously grocery store is one of those things in my mind that just goes without saying, but I'm asking like, what other stuff are the folks who we are likely to attract to Flemington Borough with new housing? What are the amenities that they're looking for? Obviously we can say walkable, amenity rich community. We can sound like Richard Florida till the cows come home, but what are the actual specific amenities that we need to put into place, especially in this particular context, right? Like what I want to make sure that our zoning, our master plan and zoning and subsequent zoning ordinances are explicitly calling out the stuff that we want to make sure we signal needs to get built or expanded or continues to stay in place.
Jeff, do you want to start with that? Or?
Sure, I think the access to walkability is the key mode people would be utilizing. I mean, we talked about transit here, but it's not there yet. So being able to walk from new development or existing development to amenities is a given. Just in terms of categories, food is a big one. I think health services would be a second one. Pharmacies, clinics, doctors, and beyond that, the basics of everyday life, the dry cleaners and the other
small pocket parks.
Okay.
Little, they don't have to be big, just small green space with tree and a bench for people to sit down on. I mean, a lot of the people who are going to be walking up and down the streets are older. And if you don't have a place for them to sit on their, because Main Street's it's a long way. Benches with trees, because in summer it's hot. Those are small amenities that don't cost a lot, but can have a huge impact on how the Main Street feels, how welcoming. Does Main Street want you to be there? Yeah, it's got benches for you to sit on, trees. Well, you have trees, street trees, but certainly any space where you can create some greenery and is welcome. And a dog park too. So for all the dogs to socialize.
Maybe blending the.
Go ahead.
One of the things I was going to mention was bike connections, other modes of non-motorized, bikes, scooters. There's all sorts of things coming out. Everyone's seeing them all over the place, but not just so on the master planning side of things, making sure that network is growing and gaps are being filled. But you might also consider on the regulatory side, the zoning side, making sure that the new projects accommodate those things. Now, some places, developers groan in Boston because you have to have 9 bikes per unit and there's nowhere to put them, but making sure there is some bike parking. There are accommodations for a not insignificant number of residents in a given property to be relying on those things. And it's not down in the basement somewhere, but it's, there's actually a bench you can fix your tire. Those things get written into into zoning and into code to just make sure those folks are accommodated and you can exist comfortably and happily without a car.
Yeah, I would say that we actually have the bike rack thing is something we've had in for a little while, and I'm definitely starting to see it. We have an applicant in front of the planning board right now. There's bike racks, you know, it's because we make it part of the thing that we want to see.
Yeah. And in Boston, the requirement is that they're inside and that they're just as easy to get in and out of as it would be to walk or use a car.
So just add one more piece. So we've talked about health, we've talked about food, and I just want to come back to talking about food in particular. You mentioned 2 stores. Food, you know, you clearly need a certain population to support, you know, a supermarket or, you know, it's a place that provides cost effectively provides access to food. The other solution is to come back to Bites, is to make the supermarkets you have as accessible as possible. A small household can very readily use a bike to go do its shopping. You don't have 6 bags of groceries or 8 bags of groceries you're bringing back. So to just make sure that accessibility is possible, you can't zone in shared mobility, but shared mobility for a lot of folks is a lot less expensive than owning a car, because if you need to call an Uber once a week to go do your shopping, that's a lot less expensive and onerous than having to pay for a house with a garage and all the things that go into owning a car. But we have to add is work. One of the things that some communities have begun to require, and this would be of a larger development, for instance, really looking at Liberty Village and maybe Cut Glass, or would be to require that they build in, not necessarily at a WeWork scale, but shared workspaces, so that these are inviting places to work. Because the biggest reason that a household has to own 2 cars instead of 1 is so 2 people can get to jobs. So if you can make it easier to work here, then you will attract families for whom that is part of their solution.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the bikes, Jeff, because I think that was also part of my next question was about the non-motorized transport piece of it, right? Because obviously walking, you know, and I know, you know, seniors walk at twice the rate of everybody else, 8% versus 4% AARP numbers out there for a long time. So obviously sidewalks, and we've had a sidewalk policy for a very long time. If you're building anything in town that doesn't have a sidewalk, you have to put a sidewalk in. And if you don't want to put it in, we're going to make you put into it. We have a fund. Like we've been doing this for a while. And so that connectivity, I think, is, you know, we're already getting there. It's the bicycle piece that it's bicycle and then it's ride sharing. And so we have it's got to be about a half dozen folks with taxi licenses in the borough right now, because folks will, for a couple bucks, hire, a guy with a minivan who's living as it is to drive. If you look at the trips, I would venture that almost all of them are doctor's visits and grocery runs. Like that's where folks are utilizing the taxi services. So that's part of it. Like we don't have transit, we have taxis, and whether they're operating under the borough's taxi ordinance or they're operating under a rideshare app, like that's where folks are meeting that gap in their transportation. And certainly they're making a rational decision that it's cheaper to live in a less expensive place and not own a car. And then as needed, they build that into the cost of what they have to do. Bicycle networks are hard though, right? Because there's not, you got to connect the trail you got to connect a bike lane and connect the trail to something, right? And the something becomes more of a challenge here. But I think that those are important. And I'm just looking at my note here. Yeah, the last thing, and it's already been mentioned before, the last thing I just wanted to bring up again was, I don't have the same concern that's been expressed about the retail. We have a glut of retail vacancies, not just on Main Street and in Flemington Borough. We've got a glut of unfilled retail across Hunterdon County. I don't think Hunterdon needs more retail. I think spaces. I think Hunterdon needs more customers, and so I'm all there for increasing the number of people who live and walk in town. There's no argument for me here. The only subtle question is from what you're seeing from national trends in walkable downtowns, the retail that remains, the ground level with other uses above it, the mixed use buildings, the retail, what is there a appropriate size? Like a ShopRite grocery store is a 75,000 to 100,000 square foot operation. A Walmart is 100,000 square feet or more, right? A small specialty shop is like, 500-600 square feet. Like what's the magic number that we should be thinking about, right? And again, I'm thinking this from a planning perspective, like as we're looking forward to think about minimums and maximums, and like is there a kind of trend that we're seeing in the retail that we would want to see on the ground floor? Obviously a restaurant would be a different use than a specialty gift shop versus a dry cleaner, but like could somebody speak maybe to like what we should be expecting to see? Because it's not going to be large scale big box in Flemington, right? So like what should we be thinking about?
There's going to be less and less big box everywhere, but Jeff, I can, and Lori, I'll take a first stab at this, but it's unfortunately going to not be immediate gratification. We know just who to ask, and we can get you much better information than we can venture right now. What we venture right now, I think just said that, is a lot more smaller than bigger. I mean, that less than 1,000 square feet to maybe 2,000 or 3,000 for a small restaurant is going to be much more in demand. And one of the great things about retail under housing wants to be 60 to 66 feet deep as a building, to be really blunt. That's what the retail wants. And the bay sizes are about the same, 20-foot spacing, that kind of thing. So Lori, I think I saw you shaking your head, but does that, yeah, okay. Is that,
Can I piggyback on that? Can I piggyback on that? Are you talking about, can you provide, Jeff, are you asking for like a ratio of retail versus housing, or are you asking for a square footage? What are you asking for?
If we're going to do a master plan, and part of that is going to be looking at our ordinances that specify things like minimum square footage of certain kinds of uses or widths and depths, right? If we're thinking cadastral zoning type stuff, like I want to make sure that what we put forward in both the master plan and then the subsequent zoning ordinances is going to be forward-looking to the kind of retail demand that we're going to be seeing, so that someone who comes in with a project on an infill redevelopment on an existing lot builds something that by rights doesn't require a variance. Like it meets what we need to do, right? I want to make it as easy as possible for someone to come in and do a redevelopment project on an infill. I want to know what the spec should look like based on what the trend is. And if the answer is we can get you the answer, I'm good with that.
I think we can do a better job of getting it, and I know who to call. So
perfect. Perfect.
Are you talking form-based zoning, Jeff? No. Okay.
I mean, in wildest dreams, I'd love a form-based code, but we're not going there. So let's.
I just wanted to clarify what your question was. Thank you.
If we can,
Yeah,
because I want to make sure we have time for the public too.
I understand. So those were the questions that I had there, and I appreciate, David, that you can get followed back on here. And I really do appreciate you taking time for a joint meeting that we could both have both boards here and do this all in one shot. It's nice to be able to do that. Those were my questions. Thank you all.
Thanks. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm like looking at the clock, and I know we're losing people, and I want to make sure the public has time to ask questions as well. So if you are here with the public and have a question, go ahead, you raise your hand using the raise hand icon at the bottom or top of your screen, depending upon your operating system. I do not see anybody calling in on the phone. So we will start with Jim Coleman. Please, when we put you on, identify yourself and where you're from or where you live, whatever applies to you. Thank you. Mr. Coleman. You're good. You should be able to talk. You just have to unmute yourself.
Okay. Can you hear me now, Mayor?
Yep,
well, thank you all so much. It is just, Mayor, it is so impressive of you and the council being here late this evening, talking about this very, very important project. I totally admire what you all are doing. I'm with NAMDAR. We have over 80 shopping malls across the country, of which you all know that Liberty Village is one of ours. We really have appreciated working with the mayor and Robin and Stantec and Lori, you all have just done a fantastic job. We really are excited about the potential of being able to work with you to be able to make this come alive and to be able to create a housing plan that's consistent with what you all are talking about tonight, that will create new housing for your existing residents and that will help us to attract even new consumers to the borough to support the retail venues that we would like to have and to be able to support our current businesses. As you know, Mayor, 20 years ago, Liberty Village created millions of dollars in commercial tax revenue, and we want to do everything on our behalf at NAMDAR in partnering with you to be able to bring that back. One question that I wanted to just ask the Stantec team and Lori is, and I know this may be early, but I really appreciate what Jeffrey was asking about the poor developers out there and trying to figure out how best to support a developer that would be interested in our project, which we have one right now that is interested. But we wanted to know two things. One, what have you seen in other municipalities where they've been able to support the developers to close any gaps? Are there any discretionary funding programs from the new infrastructure program out of the federal government that helps counties, where counties get discretionary money to be able to hand it down also to municipalities? And then lastly, do you have any preliminary idea on the economic impact of these 540 to 760 units of housing? What would be the financial economic impact potentially right now, just, looking at some averages, or maybe whatever you do have right now that you might be able to share? And that's all I wanted to ask. Lord, my hand.
I don't think a fiscal impact analysis was done in any part of this. And that's a complicated analysis that looks at tax rates and spending and blah, 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 which we don't do. We have had our studies done in other cities, followed by a fiscal impact analyst. And they've always found that, like David says, because there's a predominance of smaller households and smaller dwelling units, that the net impact on cities is generally speaking not just positive, but very positive.
Yes.
I don't know what the dollar value is, but I am sure that in 10 years, Flemington will be a much more vibrant, thriving place with new housing, which will definitely spur the development of new kinds of spaces that maybe we don't even know what people will come up with.
Right. Well, that's what we want to do at NAMDAR, is we want to be able to help the municipality to create more property tax revenue, sales tax revenue, personal income taxes, all the commercial and tax revenue that the municipality can generate from this project. We're very committed to doing that.
And Jim, this is the answer we should just have, but actually don't. But this is going to be put you in touch. But Jeff, I think you were on that call. We had a 2-hour call today with our funding folks talking about all the things that the infrastructure bill can support for both the public and the private sector. And I have to say, if I had a better memory, I could reel some of this off to you. But one of the things that they are very happy to do is get on the phone with you and the mayor, and probably better the public and private sector on those calls, and talk about those things, because the bill is definitely intended to not just support typical public infrastructure, but support public-private partnerships also.
Right. Thank you very much, David. I totally agree.
Okay, so we can follow up, and Robin and Mayor and Jim, let us know. We can get you on the phone, folks.
Okay, thanks so much. Thank you all again for all the great work that you're doing. Just outstanding leadership. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate that. Joanne Braun, please remember to unmute. You're good, Joanne. We can't hear you. Joanne, we can't hear you. I'm gonna untake you off and then bring you back in. Just, I don't think it's a Zoom issue, but.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, yes.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Yeah, Joanne Braun, Jefferson Court, Flemington. I was part of the discussions with the Stantec. I guess it was over a year, 2 years ago when this started. Anyway, I just wanted to bring up, I have a question, and I understand about the housing, I get that. But as far as having the borough or the Flemington area a destination with things to do, because I grew up here and there was plenty to do, and little by little it was all taken away by either multifamily housing or offices or whatever. But we had a bowling alley, we had movie theaters, we had like multiple movie theaters, we had an art museum, we had I can't even think, my brain, we had a roller rink, the doll museum, the doll museum. Anyway, the point is, of course, the fair and all that kind of stuff. But my point is, I would like to know specifically, speaking of arts and culture, and like a small theater where you can do performances, not just a movie theater. With your experience in the past with adding all these extra residential units, how do you see that coming about in Flemington, where this can be a destination, not just a place to live and go get a cup of coffee and a muffin? What does that look like here?
I'll jump in. That's a really terrific question, and boy, and we probably have overly emphasized the coffee and muffin part. First of all, it's important to take a step back. Somebody, I forgot, has done a survey of how many destinations there were that really attracted tourists in the US. And I don't know, 40 or 50 years ago, there were 20, and then there were 200, and then there were 2,000, meaning that being a destination based around some kind of entertainment feature or something else that drew people is an increasingly perilous business model, because someone can always spend more and outcompete you. On the other hand, having a strong community-based economy that will support cool retail. Main streets are a terrific attraction these days in of their own right, but it's a great Main Street, and the arts and living local culture is a much more sustainable way to draw visitors, as well as create amenities above and beyond the ones that Jeff wanted to talk about a little while ago. And so building in arts and performance spaces, cultural venues as part of the, let me just say, Lori has demonstrated that there's a strong market in Flemington that enables Flemington to ask for things back from development projects, particularly larger ones, which would include space for artists and community arts facilities, programmable spaces that folks can use, places for Robin to put on festivals and special programs and things like that. And I think we're beginning to get to what you're talking about. Having places that bring in entertainment, musicians, et cetera, stuff that is of the local community and the local living culture are terrific, and be much more sustainable over the long term than having, for example, a discount mall that is can be outcompeted, or any other sort of specific attraction. I think I'm just beginning to get at your question. Jeff and Lori, do you want to add to that?
I think that, so I was just, while we were speaking, I was reviewing some of the comments that we got from the community on the website and through our surveys to see what sorts of things other people refer to as destinations. And attractions in the community. Lone Eagle got a lot of votes, the brewery, but I think increasingly people want to just come to an authentic place that has that really special restaurant that everybody knows about, that you can only get there. I mean, Flemington has a really strong arts community, factory building. So it's, the more a place feels unique and cool and interesting and authentic and historical, the more attractive it is. A lot of people just, well, maybe because I'm a planner, I do this and others might not, but they go to a place to just be in that place and just see what it's like to walk around Flemington. Flemington's unique and special. It's not so much to have, a movie theater or a museum or a single destination. It's that tableau and that full place that people are looking for. And Flemington really has the bones to build that up.
I agree with that. That's why I was a part of the movement to save the 4 buildings that were slated for demolition, where they were going to knock them all down and put new. So I totally get that sense of place, and I fought for 5 years and got semi progress with saving some of those buildings on Main Street. But
You want me to keep a timer on this? Because we're over 3 minutes at this point.
Yeah, it's okay. I don't see a lot of hands going.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Well, but I would just like to know, how, with your experience in the past, how have you seen a community be developed and be successful as you're speaking of? Like, what does that look like? I'm just trying to get a vision of, all these places are being built, and I know it's on the agenda for the future. I've been to a lot of meetings, but once they're built and those people start moving in, like, how do you? Is that when they start? Like, is there going to be? I don't know. I don't know. What I've seen is just a bunch of apartment places, not anything where there's anything where you can put something like that. It's just,
well, if you have a multifamily building on the ground floor, that's where you would want to have public uses. And we have had developers in other cities that have built, say, 3-4 story buildings, and the ground floor is empty because retail is always a challenge. So in those empty spaces, they will invite a local artist to display their paintings, or a series of artists, or the local high school kids to do an art show. That is something that attracts people. What you want to do is try to grow this naturally from scratch. And that can happen through some of those unfilled spaces, as long as the owner of the building thinks that it's a good idea. And I think that, you should be able to persuade some of these developers that this would be a really good addition to, until they can actually fill that space with retail, to make it some kind of a public space where residents can, display their art, or have an art teacher,
or go to
classes.
Yeah, or someplace to go and do something. And I also, Lori, do like that you talked about pocket parks, or little places to sit. I mean, I think that's so important with the green, with the trees, and keeping that, alive in the Flemington, the borough especially.
Can I come back to something that both Susan and Jeffrey have said, planning board Jeffrey here, which is the important role that the planning board and council are going to play in achieving the full promise, I could say, of this report or this plan, but more the full promise that that changing demographics and new demand for housing and more folks wanting to live in the borough will offer, which is, if you just let it happen and don't require that some of the ground floor spaces, even when they could all rent for retail, be held aside for the local arts and performance community to make itself visible, to make itself public, to interact with a larger community. If you don't require pocket parks as part of developments, they won't happen. One of the things that's very interesting about the way the development community works, and it's a conundrum, and it's why well-managed communities tend to have stronger real estate economies, is each individual development project seeks to maximize its own profit, its own collectively, everybody does better if every one of those projects limits its own, includes things that are public benefits, that are amenities, that may pay less rent on the ground floor, but collectively pumps up the rents on upper floors. And I'm too tired to make that clear, meaning everybody, if everybody contributes something, everybody takes that to the bank. Is this making sense?
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
Okay, and that does not happen all by itself, because out of the goodness of the heart of developers, I mean, they've got finance people that they've got to answer to, even if they were fully civically committed. It is you stepping in and saying, we welcome you to our community, and here's what we need back from you for your own good and ours. Is this fair to those of you I'm just charging with this? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. I hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Are there any other comments from the public? Questions? You raised your hand. And we had some folks earlier, but they have left us. Go to Robin. Robin, you're up.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk about an early win that I think really was a spin-off.
Oops, hold on. Sorry, you have to unmute again. I was lowering your hand and clicked the wrong thing.
Am I unmuted?
No, you are.
I just wanted to talk really quickly about a spin-off that I think is directly related to this process, which is the NPP grant that we received that is $125,000 each year for the next 5 years to pay for pocket parks, murals on the street, murals on the walls, interpretive historical panels that can lead people from one part of town to another part of town. There's, the NPP is really good at placemaking. This grant comes with a lot of technical expertise. And I think that what level of attraction we need to fill in here until we have developers who we can who have vision and will help us get some of the public art and some of the public playful pauses and pocket parks and placemaking that we really need everywhere in the borough, but particularly on Main Street and particularly on the streets that lead to Stangl. I think that I hope that everyone is encouraged to work with us and to fill out the MPP survey, because there is money, particularly now, there's a lot of money that we can get to spend to make Flemington a better place. And the magic of Flemington that I wish Jeff and David and Lori, I'm sure Lori's seen some of it, but our holiday parade, bar none, is when people come together, and our filling station beer garden on a Friday night, any of our events are really magical experiences that I can tell you the people in Cambridge, Massachusetts would pay me to tell them how to do that, because it's very special and it is very unique to Flemington. And we really do have a magical community when it comes together. We just don't have enough spaces for it to come together. And, so we have to close the street to have those experiences. And I think that what we get is not just a lot of housing, but opportunities to create the kind of attractive places and spaces we really need, we all want. So I think this has been such a great conversation, and I really encourage everybody to fill out the NPP grant, because we can quickly start to spend money on the the kind of things, the small things that really make a big difference. And that's all I had to say. But thank you everyone for participating in this conversation. It's been a great evening, and I'm glad that we've had the benefit of everyone's wisdom.
And thank you very much. The only parting comment I would want to make is that the wind is in your sails, and this is a good time to aspire. You will know immediately if you are trying to ask too much from the development community. If you are aspiring too high, no one will show up at the door. But generally, the more you, in a thoughtful and considered way, ask for community benefits that make this a more valuable community in which to live and do business, the better qualified the developers will be who show up at your door, because they are the ones who like to work in that kind of environment. And this can't be a promise, but it is certainly an observation based on experience. If you're overdoing it, it'll be obvious very fast. Mayor, if you're talking to us, you are muted.
I was talking to you. Thank you for pointing that out. So I'm not seeing any hands coming up, so I wanted to circle back to Chris. If you still had other questions, I think you did.
Nah, I'm calling it a night.
Okay.
As I think everyone else wants to do.
No, I agree. 3 hours, and
Appreciate it though. Thank you.
you're welcome. I'm not seeing any other hands going up. So this presentation has been recorded and it will be posted. I don't know if I'll get it up this evening on the YouTube channel, but definitely by sometime by tomorrow evening. Some of these graphic heavy Zoom meetings take a really long time to process on their server. So, and I'm not staying up too late to see that happen, but I will have it up there. Once we gather up the 2 presentations, the one from Lori and the one from the Stantec guys, we will also upload that to the borough website. I hope that will be tomorrow, but if it's not tomorrow, it should be by Monday or Tuesday of next week. And we'll talk then too about, loading up all the raw data as well, Jeff, that you supplied. So thank you for supplying that. And that's it. Are there any other questions before we call it a night? Do we have a motion to adjourn? Anyone?
Move to adjourn. Move to adjourn.
Okay.
Second. Beat you.
Sally, you're muted.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Good night, everyone.
No.
Good
Good
night.
night.
So much.